Chapter 835. The prosecutor from Little Rock Canyon was almost speechless from Hijichu's rebuke. His lips trembled rapidly as he made a string of meaningless syllables to express his anger. Hijichu only looked at him calmly, his shimmering almond-shaped eyes filled with cold mockery. The assistant next to the prosecutor quietly tugged on his sleeve, and the prosecutor finally snapped back to reality. He glared at Hijichu fiercely before continuing to interrogate the housekeeper. "Mr. Housekeeper, please tell us what happened on the day of the fire at the Vanderbilt residence." The housekeeper walked to the witness stand with a depressed expression and said bitterly, "That day was no different than any other day. Mr. Vanderbilt went out to walk his dog after dinner." He suddenly turned around and pointed at Yi Xian sitting on the defendant's stand. He gritted his teeth and said, "Then it was this bastard. He had been pestering our sir for several days. In the beginning he secretly pretended to be a passerby to spy on our sir. Later our sir found out, so he pestered our sir for some unknown reason. After sir rejected him, he became angry and set fire to the house, killing everyone in our sir's family." As soon as the housekeeper's words came out, the courtroom was instantly in an uproar. The 6 members of the jury all had different expressions as they looked thoughtfully at Yi Xian on the defendant's stand. The people in the gallery had already begun to angrily criticize Yi Xian. These people were all Vanderbilt's neighbors who lived on the street and had good relationships with the family. Seeing them die so tragically and innocently, including 4 children, made them hate Yi Xian even more. Someone even publicly stood up and called him a demon. "You will have retribution." Hijichu looked back and coldly glanced at the person who had started the commotion. The judge knocked his gavel expressionlessly. "No noise is allowed in the courtroom. Please ask the person who was shouting to leave." Several bailiffs walked over and chased out the person who had just stood up and called Yi Xian a demon. Everyone was much quieter now and no one spoke carelessly anymore. The prosecutor appeased the agitated housekeeper and walked in front of Yi Xian. With a triumphant expression he asked, "Mr. Yi, may I ask if you've been spying on Mr. Vanderbilt?" "You just have to answer yes or no." Yi Xian thought about it. He had indeed observed Mr. Vanderbilt for a few days before meeting him. He wasn't sure if Gu Yanran was telling the truth, so he had to confirm it first. But if he answered yes, it would prove that he was peeping. Voyeurism and observation are 2 completely different concepts that can seriously mislead a jury. Before Yi Xian answered, he looked at Hijichu. Hijichu was expressionless, as if it didn't matter how Hua Xiaoheng answered. He was calm and relaxed. This relaxed mood infected Yi Xian and he calmly said, "No. You lied." The prosecutor became even more excited. "Mr. Butler wasn't the only one who saw you peeping at Mr. Vanderbilt. Other people saw it too. The witness is here, how dare you quibble?" Yi Xian didn't say anything because Hijichu had already stood up to defend him. "Mr. Prosecutor, before you assert that my client is lying, please explain the definition of voyeurism." The prosecutor, "Mr. Prosecutor, please answer my question." Hijichu was unfazed as he requested for an answer again. Even the judge looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor finally thought about it carefully and stuttered, "Voyeurism is the act of peeping at someone's private matters without their permission." Hijichu nodded and walked to the butler's side. "Mr. Butler, may I ask where my client was when you saw him peeping at Mr. Vanderbilt?" "On the street," the butler answered blankly. "Many people saw it. They can testify." He gestured to the neighbors on the block who were sitting in the gallery. Everyone nodded and agreed that the butler was right. Hijichu's expression was solemn as his cold gaze swept across everyone in the courtroom. Some people couldn't help but lower their heads and look away before turning back to the butler. "Was it day or night at the time?" "Day. Oh, I should say evening," the butler quickly emphasized. "At the time, I had just watched the cook clean up the kitchen and come out to take Mr. Vanderbilt home." "So, your client exposed his private matters on the street in the evening?" Hijichu's lips twitched. "May I ask what private matters he exposed?" "Objection. The defendant's lawyer is slandering the deceased's reputation." The prosecutor immediately stood up and pointed at Hijichu. "Lawyer He, you're so famous, yet you're asking such a question. I didn't expect you to be such a great lawyer He." Hijichu stood quietly in the courtroom, his posture straight and solemn. His upright demeanor made the glossy-faced prosecutor next to him look like a clown. He slowly waited for him to finish before retorting, "Mr. Prosecutor already stated the legal definition of voyeurism. It's the act of peeping at someone's private matters without their permission. My client saw the deceased Mr. Vanderbilt on the street during the day. May I ask how my client was able to peep at the private matters of another person walking on the street under these circumstances? Unless that person was exposing his private matters. The prosecutor was confused by Hijichu's series of question marks. After a while he finally realized he had slapped himself in the face. Hijichu had tricked him from the beginning. First he had him explain what voyeurism was, then he used his own definition to defeat him. He was too cunning. The prosecutor glared at Hijichu and clenched his fists. Peeping at someone without their permission is voyeurism. Wrong. Hijichu shook his finger. In the eyes of the law, it's only considered voyeurism if you peep at someone's private matters. Since both of them were on the street at the time, and the deceased did not do anything private, the prosecutor and the housekeeper's accusation of my client voyeurism against Mr. Vanderbilt is not valid. The judge nodded and banged his gavel. Prosecutor and witness, please watch your words. The prosecutor's first move was easily countered by Hijichu. He continued to ask the cook angrily, "May I ask what you were doing that day?" The cook was not like the housekeeper. She was always in the kitchen or in her staff dormitory, so she had never seen Yi Xian. She had only heard the housekeeper mention it a few times, so she answered honestly, "I was cooking." After cleaning up the kitchen and dining room, the housekeeper came back first with the dog and said that Mr. Vanderbilt saw the man who was always following him. The two of them were talking and arguing. "Look here. Is the man who was arguing with Mr. Vanderbilt here?" The prosecutor asked the cook to look for that person in the courtroom. The cook's gaze lingered curiously on Yi Xian's face for a while before finally looking away. She said, "I've never seen that person, nor have I heard that person's voice. I only heard the housekeeper mention that there was such a person, so I can't identify anyone." The cook refused to identify Yi Xian, so the jury members immediately looked at each other. The prosecutor's expression was a bit dark, so he interrogated the neighbors on the same street. Some of these people had seen Yi Xian and remembered him because they thought he was particularly handsome. But what they saw was no different from what the housekeeper had said. They only saw Yi Xian and Mr. Vanderbilt on the street and seemed to have argued, but they didn't know what they were arguing about. The last witness to be questioned was the sheriff of the Little Rock Canyon Police Department. He was calmer and more valiant than the other witnesses. As soon as the prosecutor saw him, he was extremely happy. "Mr. Sheriff, may I ask if you arrested a Barbadian man suspected of arson and murder in the early morning hours of October 29th? Is he in court?" The sheriff glared at Yi Xian and said in a low, muffled voice, "Yes, he is in this courtroom. It's him." He pointed at Yi Xian as he spoke. Yi Xian looked down at the table in front of him and didn't even look at the sheriff. "May I ask why you arrested him?" "Because he is suspected of arson and murdering Mr. Vanderbilt's family. Extremely vicious and evil. Extremely sinful," the sheriff said resolutely. His face was full of righteousness and was very infectious. Two jurors were almost brainwashed by his words and began to lean towards Yi Xian's guilt. Hijichu raised his hand. "Objection. Mr. Sheriff's words are only subjective assumptions. Without any witness or material evidence, you arrested my client and detained him for more than 72 hours without reason. We reserve the right to seek compensation from the Little Rock Canyon Police and Mr. Sheriff." "What did you say? Compensation?" The sheriff was furious. He leaned out from the witness stand and roared at Hijichu, "Are you questioning my professional ability? I've been the sheriff for 30 years, and I've never been questioned by anyone. There's a first time for everything, Mr. Sheriff. You have to get used to being questioned in the future." Hijichu spread his hands and glanced at everyone in the courtroom before finally resting his eyes on the sheriff's face. "Mr. Sheriff, please tell us first why you think Yi Xian is the primary suspect?" "It's very simple. He previously had an argument with Mr. Vanderbilt, and after the argument he disappeared for 4 hours. It was during those 4 hours that Mr. Vanderbilt's family was brutally murdered and set on fire. This heinous crime was committed by this person." The sheriff's words reverberated inside and outside the courtroom again, and everyone couldn't help but listen. Scrutinizing eyes looked at Yi Xian. Yi Xian's eyes were still lowered as he sat ramrod straight on the defendant's stand. After the sheriff finished speaking, the prosecutor stood up and proudly read the charges against Yi Xian. Barbadian male Yi Xian is accused of setting fire to the Vanderbilt residence in Little Rock Canyon, Utah, and murdering 12 members of his family on October 28. The judge and jury are requested to consider the seriousness of the case and decide on the appropriate punishment. The prosecutor simply stated the charges, and then it was up to the defendant's lawyer to cross-examine the witnesses and review the evidence to refute the prosecution's charges. Because time was tight and he didn't have time to explain the key points to Smith, Hijichu was worried that Smith wouldn't be able to adapt to the situation and mess up the trial, so he chose to appear in court to defend himself. He calmly stood up from the defendant's stand and walked to the center of the courtroom. He nodded to everyone in a graceful manner. Almost everyone in the courtroom had a good impression of him as soon as they saw him. Only the sheriff looked at him coldly. Hijichu pretended not to see the sheriff's gaze and walked straight to the prosecutor. He spoke in fluent English with a perfect Oxford accent. "Mr. Prosecutor, may I ask what direct witnesses and evidence are you relying on for your charges? I didn't see you mention any direct witness or evidence at all earlier." "The direct witness is the housekeeper, and the evidence is the scene of the fire. What questions do you have?" The corners of the prosecutor's mouth twitched mockingly. He no longer thought much of Hijichu. Hijichu calmly walked in front of him. He stroked his chin with one hand and propped up his other elbow with the other. He said thoughtfully, "So in the eyes of the prosecutor, a person seen 4 hours before the murder can also be considered direct evidence. No wonder you only won 10% of the cases and lost 90% of the cases in the 30 years you've been a prosecutor. You're slandering me." The prosecutor didn't expect Hijichu to know about his work-performance ratio. He was instantly furious. "You're invading my privacy. I'm going to sue you." "Mr. Prosecutor, as a public official, your work performance is not your personal privacy. The taxpayers have the right to know the actual content." Hijichu's voice grew cold. He turned to look at the agitated sheriff. "And Mr. Sheriff, you're using subjective assumptions instead of objective evidence to arrest people. This is a serious abuse of public power." As soon as the prosecutor heard Hijichu link this matter to the problem of the police abusing public power, his heart skipped a beat and he cursed inwardly. As expected, the expressions of the jury members immediately changed. Including the 3 men who had originally been dismissive of Yi Xian, they all began to consider Hijichu's question of the police abusing public power. "Members of the jury, Mr. Vanderbilt's murder case is very complicated. However, the case my client is involved in is very simple. To put it simply, he accidentally appeared in an inappropriate place, so he was used and framed. But this sheriff didn't arrest the real murderer and only arrested my client based on hearsay without any direct witness or physical evidence. He even refused to release him on bail. If this is allowed, then where is the dignity of the law? Where are the personal rights of citizens?" Hijichu's clear voice was loud and clear. Every word was like a heavy hammer that smashed into the hearts of everyone in the courtroom. The sheriff was sweating profusely from Hijichu's words. He quickly stood up to defend himself. "I didn't abuse public power. I have evidence." "What evidence?" "A housekeeper saw my client talking to Mr. Vanderbilt on the street in the evening. You call that direct evidence? If you infer that, then Mr. Housekeeper is even more suspicious because he and Mr. Vanderbilt spoke countless times, and I'm guessing there was an argument. More importantly, Mr. Vanderbilt's entire family was killed, but Mr. Housekeeper and the cook were safe and sound. If you infer that, then you two are also suspects." Hijichu pointed at Mr. Vanderbilt's housekeeper and cook. The 2 of them were terrified and cried out in unison. "No, we didn't do it. You have no evidence." "Now you know I have no evidence? Mr. Housekeeper, then you keep saying that my client committed murder and arson. May I ask where is your direct evidence? I remember you said in your statement at the police station that you didn't see who did it because you were already asleep at the time." Hijichu narrowed his eyes and raised his chin slightly. He looked coldly at the sweating housekeeper. "According to Mr. Sheriff's logic, you didn't have anyone to prove that you were asleep at the time, so you are also a suspect and even more suspicious. Because statistics show that this kind of family murder case is 99% committed by insiders." The housekeeper stared at Hijichu with his mouth agape. He didn't understand how he had suddenly gone from an important witness to an important suspect. This is the 4,300-word second chapter. 2 chapters today, asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. What about the recommendation votes, dear friends? You have to vote all of them. Oh. P.S. Big chapter. Good night, dear friends. The book review section is under maintenance. It said that it can't be used normally until after 10 p.m. Also, I posted a 500-word rant on Sino Weibo. If you want to see it, you can follow my Sino Weibo, Writers Cambrian. Chapter 836. Objection. The defendant's lawyer is making unreasonable inferences and slandering the prosecution's witness. The prosecutor quickly stood up to object to Hijichu continuing. These two situations cannot be compared. The housekeeper has served the Vanderbilt family for over 20 years without making any mistakes, but this Mr. Yi Xian had a dispute with Mr. Vanderbilt a few days after coming here, and then Mr. Vanderbilt's entire family was killed. I would like to ask this Mr. Yi Xian, what dispute did you have with Mr. Vanderbilt? Yi Xian sat at the defendant's stand and said nothing. He didn't answer the prosecutor's question. Hijichu also didn't want everyone to know about Gu Xiangwen's matter, so he interrupted the prosecutor's question. The prosecutor's question is beyond the scope of this case. Also, the argument of a dispute is only Mr. Housekeeper's account. Is there anyone who can prove that they had a dispute on the street? Hijichu looked at the neighbors on the street where the Vanderbilt family lived. These people were a bit hesitant when faced with Hijichu's solemn expression. If this was an online fight without any legal consequences, they would have said without hesitation, yes. Moreover, they would fabricate some sensational content to gain more clicks on the internet. But now in court, every word they said would have legal consequences. And lying as a witness was a crime in itself. Therefore, they hesitated for a moment before shaking their heads. Indeed, they had only seen Yi Xian and Mr. Vanderbilt talking, and they seemed to be a bit agitated, but no one had personally heard what they had said. Only the heavens, the earth, and Yi Xian knew what they talked about. Yi Xian secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He didn't want everyone to know about Gu Xiangwen's will. Hijichu calmly made a helpless gesture to the prosecutor. It doesn't matter what my client said to Mr. Vanderbilt. What's important is whether or not he had the conditions and motive to commit the crime. If he does, please prove it to the prosecutor. If you can't produce evidence, please don't continue to detain my client. According to the principle of presumption of innocence in the American judicial system, if the prosecution had no evidence to prove the defendant's guilt, then the defendant was innocent and should be acquitted. The prosecutor glared at the chief officer with a dark expression. Collecting evidence should be the responsibility of the police, but the sheriff was clearly only satisfied with arresting Yi Xian and didn't collect any further evidence. This caused him to be passive in court. The chief's expression was uncertain, and he felt a little regretful. To be honest, the difficulty of this case was not something that a sheriff of a small place like him could handle. The right thing to do was to contact the FBI immediately and let them take over the investigation. However, the sheriff was momentarily blinded by greed and wanted to use this opportunity to increase his reputation and leave a strong mark in his career. Therefore, he had selfish motives and wholeheartedly locked up Yi Xian, hoping to find important clues from him. She hadn't expected Yi Xian to be able to invite Hijichu to be his defense lawyer. Not only could he immediately schedule the trial, but he also seemed to have introduced a new important suspect to them. The sheriff's gaze fell on the butler. He sneered but didn't say anything. Seeing this, the prosecutor knew that there was nothing he could do. He threw out two harsh words. God knows whether he did anything or not. He knows it himself. Hijichu didn't comment on the prosecutor's harsh words. He turned to look at the judge and made his closing statement. Your Honor, my client has no motive or condition to commit murder and arson. In fact, he didn't even set foot in Mr. Vanderbilt's home. Just because he said a few words to him on the street, he is charged with murder and arson. The prosecutor and the sheriff's behavior of ignoring the law and knowingly breaking the law is outrageous. On behalf of my client, I solemnly request an acquittal to the court. I hope that the Little Rock Canyon police will cooperate with the FBI as soon as possible to find the real murderer and seek belated justice for Mr. Vanderbilt's family. Hijichu's words shocked the jury. They discussed behind closed doors for half an hour and came to the conclusion that Yi Xian was not guilty of murder and arson. Coming out of the conference room, they presented the jury's decision to the judge. The judge looked at it and had similar thoughts to him. Although Yi Xian's sudden appearance in Little Rock Canyon and then Mr. Vanderbilt's family's misfortune were very suspicious, there was no direct or indirect evidence to link Yi Xian to this case. The hearsay of passers-by and the butler's side of the story were not enough for the jury to conclude that Yi Xian was guilty. Also, when the Supreme Court judge looked through the file, he discovered that Mr. Vanderbilt's family still had a suspicious case. More than a decade ago, when Mr. Vanderbilt was still living in New York State, his eldest son suddenly drowned in the sea when he went out to sea. His eldest son's wife insisted that he was killed, but the local police ruled that he committed suicide. Mr. Vanderbilt had a very bad relationship with the local police, so he moved away from New York State and settled in Little Rock Canyon, Utah, in the middle of nowhere. Since then, Mr. Vanderbilt spent a lot of money to equip his entire family with bodyguards, but he didn't expect that they still wouldn't be able to protect his family's lives. More than a decade ago, Yi Xian wasn't even 10 years old, so it couldn't have been related to him at that time. Because of this, the judge didn't insist on keeping Yi Xian. Also, He Zhichu had a lot of influence, so the judge announced in court that Yi Xian was not guilty of murder and arson and would be released on the spot. As soon as the judge announced the verdict, the people He Zhichu brought cheered. Yi Xian also revealed an expression of relief. However, He Zhichu's expression didn't relax at all. He still had a cold expression as he watched Smith go forward to hand over work to the bailiff. The sheriff of Little Rock Canyon turned around to glare at He Zhichu and Yi Xian before quickly chasing after them. He asked the Vanderbilt family's butler to go back to the police station to assist in the investigation. After the prosecutor finished packing, he thought about it and still went to He Zhichu. He extended his hand and said sincerely, "Lawyer He, I apologize for offending you today. You're too kind, Mr. Prosecutor. This is your duty." He Zhichu bowed elegantly and shook his hand before leaving with Yi Xian. Walking out of the courtroom, Yi Xian squinted at the bright blue sky and sighed deeply. One only knew how to cherish the feeling of freedom after losing it. "Thank you, Mr. He, for your help. If it weren't for you this time, I wouldn't have escaped danger so quickly." Yi Xian sincerely thanked He Zhichu. He Zhichu glanced at him and snorted. With his hands behind his back, he said, "You think you've escaped danger? No, your danger has just begun." Yi Xian was speechless. What did He Zhichu mean? Why didn't he understand? He Zhichu quickly walked down the steps and said, "There's no time to lose. Let's leave this place immediately." Yi Xian followed him down the steps and was extremely shocked. "Mr. He, what do you mean? Is there still danger?" But the Vanderbilt family was already dead. Yi Xian had wanted to stay a few more days to investigate who would inherit the Vanderbilt family's inheritance now that they were all dead. In modern society, the inheritance of these rich people wouldn't be gone once their house was burned down. Bank accounts, safe deposit boxes, trust funds, documents, and outside companies had too many places to hide a will. He didn't want to leave Little Rock Canyon at all. He Zhichu stopped in front of his car and said simply, "The Vanderbilt family is all dead. Their target now is you." "Me?" Yi Xian was even more confused. "I don't know anything about Uncle Gu." The corners of He Zhichu's eyes twitched imperceptibly when he heard Yi Xian also call Gu Xiangguan Uncle Gu. "Get in the car." Yi Xian followed him into the car and drove to the interstate highway from Little Rock Canyon to Salt Lake City International Airport. He Zhichu and Yi Xian both sat in the back. It was a luxurious bulletproof Cadillac sedan. The interior was very spacious, and there was a soundproof and bulletproof glass wall between the driver and passenger seats in the front and the back seats. This glass wall was erected to ensure the safety and privacy of the passengers in the back. He Zhichu finally studied Yi Xian a few times. The corners of his shimmering, sultry eyes tilted up, and the hesitation in his eyes was very obvious. Yi Xian uncomfortably shifted to the side and tried to stay as far away from He Zhichu as possible. "You call Gu Xiangguan Uncle Gu?" He Zhichu seemed to be suddenly interested in his relationship with Gu Xiangguan. Yi Xian didn't hide it from him and nodded. "Uncle Gu sponsored me to study in the United States. I'm very grateful to him. So when he was in trouble, he wanted to help protect the Gu family." He Zhichu snorted softly and said coldly, "It's too easy for him to sponsor an orphan's education. A little money from his fingers can create a millionaire. Is there a need for you to be so grateful?" He was practically doing his best until his death. Yi Xian pursed his lips and turned to look at him. "Mr. He, I don't take others' kindness to me for granted. Especially when Uncle Gu is not related to me, but he's willing to do so many things for me and change my life. Of course I'm grateful to him and am willing to do anything for him." He Zhichu didn't comment and looked coldly at Yi Xian. "That's it? As far as I know, Gu Xiangguan doesn't care much about you. He left you in the United States for so many years and didn't care about you. Aside from sending money, what has he done for you?" Yi Xian didn't like hearing this. He stiffened his neck and said angrily, "Uncle Gu did it for my own good. Although he didn't allow me to return to Barbados all these years, I've always been in contact with him online. Not only did he keep in contact with him, but he also kept in contact with that weird little girl. But when he thought about how the person he was chatting with anonymously was actually Gu Nianji and not Gu Yanran, Yi Xian's heart was filled with mixed emotions. His aura also dimmed. I met her a few times when I was in the orphanage, but we were still young. She was arrogant and bossy. She was a bad-tempered little girl and didn't like to talk much. But when I fell into the sea, she didn't hesitate to save me. I knew it. How could Uncle Gu's daughter be that kind of person? I actually believed everything Gu Yanran said about her." Yi Xian smiled bitterly and clenched his fists. He hated himself to the core. Ijichu was slightly taken aback. His heart tightened. Bad-tempered little girl? You mean Yenji? This is the first update. Today is the third update. I'm asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Where are the recommendation votes from my dear friends? You have to vote all of them. Oh. At 1 p.m., the monthly votes are 7,600 plus updates. At 7 p.m. the third update. P.S. Thank you to my dear leader Light Smile Veil, for the second spiritual pet fate egg, 100,000 Chidian dollars, yesterday. Thank you to Fwy001 for the Heshibi, 10,000 Chidian dollars, yesterday. Moi. Chapter 837. Yes, it's Gunyenji. Yixin lowered his voice and didn't dare look at Hijichu's expression. He quickly turned to look at the mountains outside the car window. The mountains surrounding Little Rock Canyon were actually large canyons. The red rocks had been eroded by the wind, revealing the iron mountain within. It was very pleasing to the eye against the blue sky and white clouds. Hijichu only snorted quietly. Gu Xiangwen treats you so well, but what about her? Yixin frowned and turned to look at Hijichu. What does Mr. He mean by that? Nianji is his biological daughter, so he can only treat her better. In fact, I've never seen a father treat his daughter so well. The corners of Hijichu's mouth twitched as he rested a hand on the side of the car window. That's because you've seen too little. Really? Yi Xian didn't want to hear people talk badly about Gu Xiangwen, and he was even more unwilling to hear people say he treated Gu Nianji badly. Gu Nianji is very smart, but she has a bad temper and gets angry very easily. Once she throws a tantrum, no one can calm her except Uncle Gu. One time I saw Gu Nianji hit Uncle Gu with a rock and made his head bleed, but he comforted her in a very good manner until she wasn't angry anymore. Only then did he carry her back. Hijichu was speechless. Who was he talking about? Are you sure the bad-tempered little girl you saw was really Gu Nianji? Hijichu couldn't help but ask. He thought what Yi Xian was saying was too ridiculous. Yi Xian nodded firmly. I remember what she looked like when she was young. Although she's completely different from now, the age matches. Also, her current appearance is similar to Uncle Gu's, especially the nose. She didn't look like Uncle Gu at all when she was young, but she looked like Auntie Gu. He had originally thought Gu Nianji would look like Gu Yanran when she grew up, but he later found out that wasn't the case. You see her often? Hijichu actually wasn't interested in listening to Yi Xian, but Gu Nianji cared about Yi Xian and Gu Xiangwen so much, so he had to ask around. Not often. Yi Xian sank into the past. When Uncle Gu came to the orphanage, he would sometimes bring her along. At that time she always wore a big white wide-brimmed hat and a pink princess dress, and Uncle Gu always held her hand. It was so many years ago, yet he could still remember it so clearly. It was clear that he had a deep impression of it. Hijichu didn't know what to say, so he could only listen quietly. Yi Xian was silent for a while, then said shamefully, "After that, I fell into the sea and was saved by her. She got sick because of this and I was sent to a boarding school in the United States for many years. If I go back I'll recognize the wrong person." Hijichu's other hand rested leisurely on the car seat. His fingers tapped lightly as he said dryly, "How could you mistake her for someone else? It's obvious that your impression of her is only SOSO. Yi Xian shook his head with a wry smile. Yes, most of my impression of her came from chatting with her online all those years ago. After that, we got to know each other better and I found out that she had always been sick. Uncle Gu was very worried about her health and took good care of her." Sick? Hijichu was surprised. His fingers stopped tapping. Nianji was sick when she was young? Are you sure? That's what she said on the internet. She said that her health wasn't good and that she was sick when she was born. Her parents were very good to her, but they didn't know if they could cure her. Yi Xian propped his head up with his hand and leaned against the window on the other side. His deep-set features softened because of his longing. It was as if the sharpness of a knife had suddenly been wrapped in a scabbard. Now it was Hijichu's turn to frown. Who is Gu Nianji's mother? Hijichu shifted uneasily as he looked over with his long narrow eyes. Yi Xian wasn't familiar with Gu Nianji's mother, so he thought about it and said, "I think her name was Grace. I heard Gu Nianji mention it on the internet once. Her mother and Uncle Gu used to be classmates, and they had a very good relationship. It sounded like a normal, peaceful and beautiful family. Unfortunately, the family was almost broken up now." Hijichu was a bit lost in thought. It was really different now. Both of them were lost in their own thoughts, so no one spoke in the car. Then the driver in front suddenly spoke to Hijichu through the car's intercom. Mr. He, I just received news that the road ahead has been cordoned off. We have to take another route. Hijichu sat up straight and asked, "What is it?" The radio said that the commander of the Pacific Fleet's motorcade is here, so we have to make way for him. The driver was a local, so he seemed a bit indignant as he hit the steering wheel. There was a pfft from the intercom. Hijichu narrowed his eyes and thought about it. Are we on Route 95 yet? Not yet. We have to get off the highway here to get to Route 95. Route 95 was an interstate highway that traversed across the United States. They were still driving on the Little Rock Canyon Highway. If we take a detour, how long will it take? It depends. Everyone can't leave now, so it won't be easy to turn around if we're stuck here. The driver was also very helpless. He turned on the GPS and repositioned himself to find the way. Hijichu rubbed his forehead as he pondered what to do. Yi Xian heard that the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet had arrived and was very surprised. What is this person doing in Little Rock Canyon? I heard that he's here to inspect the OV Air Force Base here. The mockery on Hijichu's face grew stronger. He thinks he's important too. Yi Xian had attended boarding school in the United States, so he was no stranger to American political news. When he heard that it was the commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, he couldn't help but laugh. Did he want to come of his own accord, or is someone deliberately trying to mess with him? What do you mean? Hijichu put down his hand and pondered whether to take a detour or wait until the curfew was over before leaving. The commander of the Pacific Fleet is Japanese, and the OV Air Force Base is the training base for the B-29 stealth bomber. The planes and pilots who dropped the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki left from here. But this Japanese commander specifically came to inspect this Air Force Base. Do you think this commander is too careless, or is someone deliberately causing trouble for him? As Yi Xian spoke, he looked around to find out where they were. Hijichu laughed. Maybe it's neither. The Japanese have a problem, and that is, they fear power and do not have virtue. To put it simply, it's useless to use virtue to win people over. You must beat them to the ground before they will be respectful to you. Therefore, although the Americans had taught the Japanese a lesson in the past, the Japanese didn't hate the U.S. military. Instead, they had an indescribable feeling for them. Yi Xian seemed to understand something after hearing it. You mean this commander doesn't think of himself as the person from that day? No, it's the exact opposite. He thinks of himself as the person from that day. Hijichu finished speaking and smiled. He had also made up his mind. Take a detour to 95. Not far ahead, they could already see the commander of the Pacific Fleet's motorcade heading over in a grandiose manner. At the very front were 7 or 8 motorcycles clearing the way, followed by 4 identical Ford bulletproof limousines. And behind the limousines were 2 trucks. In the back of the truck sat 100 or so armed guards, all of them wearing hoods that covered their faces. This was the second update. Sorry dear, I have to go back on my word today. I can't even keep my eyes open. I have to sleep early today and update again tomorrow. P.S. The first few chapters have been edited. Chapter 838. It was November in Utah and the weather was good. The sun shone on the brownish-red stone mountains in the distance, making them look even more spacious and distant. The layers of the stone mountains overlapped one another, giving off the wildness of a vast yellow desert. From time to time, fighter jets would take off from the OV Air Force Base, dragging long trails of white smoke behind them as they wandered in the blue and transparent sky. The air was filled with the faint fragrance of lilies. Utah wasn't a bustling place and Little Rock Canyon wasn't a city with a lot of people either. But today, because of the visit of Laris, the commander-in-chief of the Pacific Fleet, this somewhat desolate little city suddenly became lively. The highway entrance, which used to be empty, was now crowded with police cars with flashing siren lights. They blocked the highway entrance, waiting for Laris' fleet to pass. Hijichu and Yi Xian sat in the custom-made bulletproof Cadillac sedan and were waiting for the driver to turn around and detour to Route 95. At this moment, the sound of gunfire suddenly rang out. A bomb that had been shot out of nowhere landed on the motorcycles in front of Laris' convoy with a loud bang. Thick black smoke immediately rose, appearing especially abrupt and glaring under the clear blue sky. Report. Admiral Laris' convoy had been attacked. Admiral Laris' convoy had been attacked. Admiral Laris' convoy has been attacked. The messenger of Admiral Laris's motorcade shouted at the top of his lungs to the office of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff through the special line. The Joint Chiefs of Staff was a group composed of the top leaders of the U.S. military. The chairman of this organization was second only to the President in the United States. He was the second in command of the United States military, while the first in command was the president. However, everyone knew that the president was only a nominal title. The real leadership group of the United States military was the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Admiral Laris was the commander-in-chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet and one of the members of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. This position was absolutely at the top of the U.S. military and enjoyed the highest level of security qualifications. His convoy being attacked meant that someone had attacked Admiral Laris, and it also meant that this was a declaration of war against the entire United States of America. It didn't matter if it was an individual organization or a national organization that launched the attack. For the U.S. military, there was only one result: annihilation. Annihilate at all costs. Immediately, the entire military of Little Rock Canyon was mobilized. Fighter jets, bombers, and armed helicopters immediately took off from OV Air Force Base. The entire city was under a no-fly order. Apart from the fighter jets of the OV Air Force Base, no other planes were allowed to take off. Be it civil or military planes with permits, nothing was allowed to take off. The soldiers wearing helmets immediately jumped out from the back of the two military trucks behind Laris' convoy with their guns raised. They were on high alert as they approached the vehicles in front of them step by step. The gunshots and bombs that had attacked Laris' convoy had come from this direction. Get off. Raise your hands. Lean against the door. The hooded U.S. soldiers violently grabbed the people in the cars one by one. Some people tried to reason with them, but the U.S. military seemed to have no patience at all. They shot at those people's heads. In an instant, 3 or 4 people died under the guns of these people. The rest of the people didn't dare to reason with the soldiers anymore. They did whatever they were told and didn't dare to resist. In the beginning, He Jichu and Yi Xian still sat in the car and didn't move. They were only waiting for the sudden commotion to pass before detouring. It wasn't until they saw the aggressive U.S. soldiers charging over that the corners of He Jichu's eyes suddenly twitched. His car's soundproofing and bulletproof functions were very good, so they didn't hear the gunshots. However, the power of the bombs could be felt through the heavy car. He Jichu narrowed his eyes and felt that something was wrong. He took out his phone and was about to call little A when he discovered he was already calling. Mr. He. The other party has an expert. He Jichu said in a low voice, "Stop talking nonsense. What happened?" There were gunshots outside just now, and the news has already confirmed that Admiral Laris' convoy was attacked by terrorists. Now the U.S. military has fully activated their emergency plan and is requesting everyone to quickly evacuate. The military wants to pursue the attackers to the death. Little A's voice was very low, but his anger could be heard. You guys didn't do it, right? He Jichu couldn't help but ask. Although he knew the possibility was very low, what if little A found a group of idiotic teammates? Of course not. Our people had just gotten into position, and the angle of the gunshots and bombs wasn't from our direction at all. Now all of Little Rock Canyon is banned from flying, and the military helicopter permits we applied for are invalid. Little A cursed viciously, "WF," and said before hanging up, "We'll be on the highway first. Mr. He, get out of the car quickly. I saw them coming in your direction." There was no sound from the Bluetooth headset, and He Jichu looked out the window expressionlessly. Groups of soldiers with live ammunition and helmets covering their faces were searching the cars one by one. They were about to arrive in their direction. The thief is calling the thief. He Jichu sneered and pulled out his small briefcase containing the XM40 magnetic storm grenade gun from under his seat. He tossed a pistol to Yi Xian. "Take this for self-defense." Yi Xian froze. "What's going on? We didn't do it, so why are we running? Can't you tell? This is a trap. The other party is using this chaos to kill us." He Jichu said casually as he lowered his head and quickly assembled the magnetic storm grenade gun. A minute later the gun was assembled. "Get out of the car." He Jichu took off his suit jacket and put it on inside out, turning it into a hunting suit. There were several helmets in the briefcase, and He Jichu put one over his head to cover his face. It was the same as the ones used by the soldiers in Laris' convoy. He tossed one to Yi Xian and said, "Put it on." The driver was dumbfounded, but he still held on to a sliver of hope and refused to get out of the car. He waved at He Jichu. "You guys go. I'm fine." Yi Xian took the helmet and put it on. Holding the pistol, he followed He Jichu out of the car and quickly hid in the mountain on the side of the road. He and He Jichu hid behind a large rock on the mountain and focused on watching their car at the foot of the mountain. At the foot of the mountain, U.S. soldiers wearing helmets were forming several square formations and heading in their direction. Their driver raised his hands at the soldiers from inside the car to indicate that there were no criminals here. However, a soldier wearing a helmet walked over with a gun and fired at the driver. A round, bloody hole appeared on the driver's forehead, and he collapsed in the car with his eyes wide open. He didn't understand how this had happened. Then the soldier suddenly opened fire into the car. With a burst of gunfire, he even threw a grenade before leaving. There was a loud bang, and the Cadillac Hijichu and Yi Xian had just been in was instantly blown into a pile of scrap metal. Yi Xian was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He looked at Hijichu, then at the US soldiers who had just attacked their car at the foot of the mountain. He mumbled, "What are they doing?" Someone on Laris' side wrote and directed this themselves. They used the excuse that their convoy was attacked by terrorists to give the death order of kill without mercy. The US military would do something like this for the safety of the commander? Hijichu said quietly. "Now shut up and follow me." Yi Xian nodded and didn't ask any more questions. He followed Hijichu up the mountain trail. Little A's car was on standby on Highway 95. The US military had now blocked the intersection of Upper Highway 95, so if Hijichu and the others wanted to go over, they would have to traverse the mountains on foot and bypass the checkpoint. Fortunately, it wasn't far. They didn't dare use the mountain highway, but the trail was still passable. Hijichu ran quickly in front, and Yi Xian often worked out, so his body was strong and could keep up with Hijichu's pace. However, there were more and more soldiers chasing after them, and the helicopter in the sky began to shout. Everyone returned to the Little Rock Canyon Highway entrance. The military will conduct carpet bombing on the terrorists entering the mountains. Please return to the Little Rock Canyon Highway entrance. The military will conduct carpet bombing on the terrorists entering the mountains. The quiet Little Rock Canyon stood silently among the mountains and faced the attack of a small-scale local war for the first time since its establishment. In order to grab the headlines, the TV station here couldn't wait to publish this news. However, the military quickly took over the TV station and other news media organizations, so there was no more news to be published. Only sporadic news was sent out from the Twitter and Facebook accounts of some people in Little Rock Canyon, along with some pictures. However, because there was no official confirmation, there wasn't much circulation. Boom. A string of black smoke rose from the mountains. The military set up a mortar base at the foot of the mountain and began to carry out targeted elimination of targets in the mountains. Hijichu and Yi Xian had just escaped an airstrike when they saw the road in front of them had been blown into a large crater by a bomb. Fortunately, they weren't driving, so it didn't matter if the road was cut off. However, the military's armed helicopters and fighter jets constantly circled the mountains and used thermal sensors to search for humanoid targets in the mountains. They constantly pinpointed their positions and transmitted them to the mortar troops in the rear. Yi Xian couldn't take it anymore. He raised his gun and wanted nothing more than to shoot at the armed helicopters that were relentlessly chasing them in the air. Hijichu pressed down on his hand and smiled faintly. "Let me." He raised the magnetic storm grenade gun in his hand and suddenly jumped out of the call they were hiding in to run forward. Yi Xian clenched his fists and jumped out of the call to chase after him. The armed helicopters and fighter jets in the sky sensed the direction they were moving and followed them. Hijichu ran through a narrow cliff valley. This valley was like a pair of scissors. As long as they blocked this place, it wouldn't be so easy for the people behind to catch up to them. He dodged and jumped behind a large rock on the side of the valley. He raised the magnetic storm grenade gun and aimed at the fighter jet that was chasing them the most closely and was constantly shooting at them with its machine gun. With a soft bang, a magnetic storm bullet whooshed out like an arrow and hit the belly of the fighter jet. It looked like it had only pierced a small hole that couldn't be seen with the naked eye. But in just an instant, the fighter jet was like a toy plane that had been flattened by a giant. It naturally disintegrated in the air, and the pilot didn't have time to parachute in. He was tied to the pilot's seat and fell from the sky. There was a loud bang and countless dust flew into the air. This magnetic storm bullet simultaneously disintegrated the electromagnetic and shortwave radio communication system within a 5-mile radius. The radar signal of the Air Force Base and the signal of the network base station were also completely blocked. In an instant, this place became an isolated land with no power, internet or communication. Only Hijichu's phone was an exception. His phone had an anti-jamming device, so his phone signal wasn't affected. Hijichu calmly turned on his phone and used his Bluetooth headset to contact Little A. "I turned on my phone's GPS. Can you see my direction? This is the first watch. Today is the third watch. I'm asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, so recommendation votes are very important. At 1 p.m., monthly votes for 7,600 plus watch. At 7 p.m. the third watch. P.S. Thank you to my great leader Heaven's Beggar, for his gift yesterday of Heshabi, 10,000 Chidian coins. Moi. Chapter 839. Little A's voice came from the Bluetooth headset and was full of surprise. Mr. He, your phone works? I saw it, and I also turned on my phone's GPS. Hijichu looked at his phone to determine the location between the two and quickly found the shortest route. He pressed the Bluetooth headset. Got it. He then said, listen to my orders. If the enemy continues to pursue later, wait for us to meet up and we'll have a big one. Little A gasped and his voice began to tremble. Mr. He, what are you going to do? It couldn't be what he was thinking, right? Hijichu didn't say anything else and ended the call. He looked up at the sky. It was still a rich blue, and the brownish-red mountains looked like they were drenched in blood against the backdrop of the blue sky, drawing their own thick and heavy color imprints. The fighter jets, bombers, and armed helicopters that had been buzzing around like flies earlier were now nowhere to be seen. Without electromagnetic and radio shortwave communications, and without radar guidance, these planes didn't dare to continue taking off. The orders issued by Admiral Laris's convoy, after a period of fermentation, began to arouse suspicion in the U.S. military. At the moment in Admiral Laris's private car, his expression was also very ugly. Several of his capable subordinates sat awkwardly in front of him and mumbled, Mr. Admiral, do we still want to continue? So many U.S. soldiers, so well equipped and so quick to react, yet they still hadn't caught the terrorists causing the incident and even allowed them to escape into the mountains. They originally thought it would be a quick battle without any suspense, but they encountered unexpected resistance and delays. Admiral Laris closed his eyes and crossed his arms as he leaned against the back seat without saying a word. His deputy was also a Japanese American, so he understood what he meant and sternly said to the officers, someone attacked Admiral Laris's convoy, so they must be targeting Admiral Laris. You have so many people, yet you can't even catch a few terrorists. Do you want to go to the military court to admit dereliction of duty? This can't all be blamed on us. The officers began to complain. Who knew Little Rock Canyon's power system would be so fragile? With the sudden power outage and internet outage, communications were also cut off. Fighter jets can't take off, and we don't dare to send soldiers into the mountains to search for now. The U.S. soldiers all used so-called high-end equipment, but it was actually a full set of electronic equipment. This kind of equipment was good, but it relied heavily on electromagnetic communication. There were even more advanced equipment that completely relied on satellite guidance. During a battle, if the satellite was destroyed by the enemy, then they would be like a blind and deaf man with no chance of winning and could only surrender. The U.S. military stationed at OV Air Force Base in Little Rock Canyon didn't have sophisticated equipment like satellite navigation, but they did have electronic equipment. Now that communication had been cut off, how could they dare to let these U.S. soldiers enter the mountain? Admiral Laris opened his eyes at this moment and said with an expressionless face, I thought our American soldiers were all experts who could fight 1 against 100. Without these advanced electronic devices, would they not know how to fight a war? Ridiculous. When Admiral Laris said that, those officers immediately blushed and hurriedly said loudly, Yes, Admiral Laris. We will immediately send people into the mountain. Without the pursuit of the helicopters and fighter jets, the pressure on Hijichu and Yishian instantly lessened. They began to run towards where A and the others were. The mountain road was rugged and narrow. Many times the goal seemed to be right in front of them, but in order to reach that goal they had to take a long detour. The two of them ran non-stop for the whole day, stopping only to find some water to drink. The night of winter in North America came very early. It wasn't even 5 o'clock in the evening, and the sun had already completely set. The valley gradually darkened, and the bright moon climbed over the mountain. The stars twinkled in the night sky as Hijichu and Yishian silently hurried through the night. Utah had 4 or 5 national parks, and these kinds of national parks protected the local natural topography and wildlife. The valley that Hijichu and Yishian were passing through was also part of one of Utah's national parks. At night, all kinds of wild animals came out to forage. Hijichu and Yishian dodged along the way and tried not to shoot at the wild animals to avoid attracting people. But when they went around a valley and faced a pack of wild wolves in front of it, they had no choice but to shoot. Don't shoot. Hijichu glanced at the pistol in Yishian's hand. That's for you to deal with people, not wild animals. Yishian nodded but still held the gun and stood back to back with Hijichu. Hijichu slowly took out another kind of bullet from the bullet bag and pressed it into the box of the magnetic storm grenade gun. He raised the gun and looked through the scope of the infrared night vision scope to look in the direction of the pack of wolves in front of them. The AI identification system in the scope began to work, and the wolves scanned one by one before quickly locking onto the location of the Wolf King. The most important thing in fighting a pack of wolves was to find the Wolf King and kill it with one shot. There was a crisp bang. Hijichu's bullet cut through the cold night air and hit the Wolf King's head. The Wolf King didn't even have time to howl before collapsing to the ground. When the other wolves saw this, they howled before running away with their tails between their legs. But after the wolves left, their howls really did attract people. Yi Xian's eyes flickered as he saw a light flash behind them a few times before quickly disappearing. "Someone is coming," Yi Xian said quietly as he raised the gun and aimed it at the place where the light had flashed. "Don't shoot. Let's go first." Hijichu looked back. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he didn't want to exchange fire with the U.S. Army. "Mr. He, I want to know why they're making such a big fuss. What is it for? Is it for me? I really don't think I'm that important." Yi Xian finally asked Hijichu the question on his mind as they hurried along. Hijichu wasn't a patient person. When he was a professor, he mostly taught by inspiration and let the students search for the answer on their own. He didn't teach by explaining the answer directly and then explaining why it was the correct answer. But tonight was special. Perhaps it was the situation of being chased through the mountains that made him think of Gu Nianji when she was alone in danger in the German Alps. His heart softened a little. He laughed and said with some mockery, "They're chasing terrorists. What does that have to do with you? Are you a terrorist?" "Of course not." The corners of Yi Xian's mouth twitched. "But they're clearly using the excuse of chasing terrorists to kill the two of us." Hijichu gripped the gun and looked around before replying nonchalantly, "They want to kill you, but they don't necessarily want to kill me." He was certain that the mastermind still didn't know he had come to the United States to bring Yi Xian back to the Wuxia Empire. If they knew, they wouldn't bear to reveal the important power behind them. "Yes, why?" Yi Xian shook his head in confusion. "I'm not a member of the Gu family. I'm just an orphan sponsored by Uncle Gu." Hijichu was also thinking about this. He turned to look at Yi Xian. "Then what do you know? They want you dead because you know something, but they don't want you to disclose it or tell Nianji." "What can I know?" Yi Xian was flabbergasted. He was about to say, "I was still in the United States when Uncle Gu got into trouble," but he suddenly thought of Gu Yanran and immediately swallowed his words. Hijichu saw that Yi Xian didn't speak and chuckled. "Now you know, right? Your lover doesn't want you to go back and wants your life." "You mean Gu Yanran?" Yi Xian pursed his lips and silently followed behind Hijichu for a while before saying, "She doesn't have that much power. I'm sure she can't mobilize these people." When Gu Xiangwen got into trouble, Gu Yanran relied on herself to support the Gu family and couldn't even take care of herself. Later, when Yi Xian came back to help her, she slowly gained a foothold. Not long after, Gu Yanran had an impressive lawyer, and the Gu family situation took a turn for the better. Yi Xian glanced at Hijichu. "Doesn't your assistant, Miss Wen, know best what Gu Yanran is capable of?" In the night, Hijichu's expression was normal as he said, "When Shuyi is Gu Yanran's lawyer, I might not know what she knows." He had no interest in the Gu family and only revealed that the Gu family in Barbados was Gu Nianji's home later on in order to give Gu Nianji a legitimate identity. Yi Xian was confused, but seeing Hijichu's impatient expression, he didn't ask any more questions. While they were talking, the UA squad that was chasing them had arrived not far behind them. Hijichu suddenly stopped in his tracks. "Get down." He yanked Yi Xian, and the two of them fell onto a pile of small rocks in the valley. Not long after they fell, the sound of bullets came from behind them. The sound echoed through the valley and startled a bunch of birds. This is the second update. Monthly votes of 7,600 plus updates have arrived. Today is the third update, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, so recommendation votes are very important. Third update at 7 p.m. Chapter 840. The bullet practically flew past their scalps and landed not far away, kicking up a cloud of dust. Hijichu and Yi Xian lay motionless on the ground as if they had never been there at all. The pursuers waited for a while before gesturing to each other. Raising their guns, they slowly surrounded the place where Hijichu and Yi Xian had fallen. Hijichu lay on the ground with his ear close to the ground so he could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from behind. From the subtle and cautious footsteps, he could tell that there were probably 7 soldiers, but they didn't seem to be tall because the sound of footsteps landing was proportional to their weight. The pursuers got closer and closer to the point where they could hear the sounds of quiet conversation. Because they didn't have wireless communication equipment, these people had no choice but to raise their voices to communicate. What he could hear intermittently was actually English with a Japanese accent. These people couldn't be regular soldiers of the US military. The corners of Hijichu's eyes twitched uncontrollably again. He turned his head and gestured to Yi Xian to don't move. Then just as the pursuers were about to reach him, he suddenly leaped up from the ground and kicked the large rock beside him. Using the force of this kick, Hijichu's entire body flew up diagonally like a bolt of lightning. He tightly pursed his thin lips and narrowed his shimmering, sultry eyes. Raising his arm, he held the gun in one hand in midair and aimed at the 7-man squad chasing after him. From left to right he fired one shot at each person. Even more crisp sounds of bullets being fired rang out in the valley. Ah! Those people let out short screams and quickly fell to the ground, dead. Yi Xian lay motionless on the ground until Hijichu indicated for him to get up. He only got up then. Hijichu was still half kneeling on one leg as he crouched in front of the pursuers he had just shot dead. He waved at Yi Xian. "Come over and see who the people chasing you are." He pulled off the hoods of those people, and under the moonlight, Asian faces were revealed. Or more accurately, they were Japanese faces. Japanese facial features were easy to recognize and generally wouldn't be confused with people from other Asian countries. When Yi Xian saw this, he also froze for a moment before asking, "Are there many Japanese Americans in the US military?" "No matter how many there are, they can't be assigned to a small team to carry out the mission," Hijichu said coldly as he took out his phone and took photos of the dead pursuers. If possible, he really wanted to take a sample of these people's blood as well. Then he might be able to make an American general step down, Hijichu thought coldly, but it was a pity that he had only brought a gun with him to escape, so it was impossible to collect a blood sample. Yi Xian walked around those people a few times and rubbed his nose with one hand. "These people aren't US soldiers. You only noticed now." Hijichu glanced at him mockingly. "Would I have shot you otherwise?" Yi Xian frowned and was a bit unhappy, but Hijichu was his savior after all. Now that Hijichu was in danger because of him, he deserved to be mocked a little. Hijichu put away his phone and turned to continue walking. Not long after, he stopped again and listened attentively for a while. He pointed in the direction of a fork and said, "That way. Let's go in first." Not long after they hid inside, a group of pursuers wearing the same attire as the ones Hijichu had just killed ran past in front of the fork. These people weren't tall and couldn't compare to most US soldiers. Yi Xian realized at that moment that these people were probably also Japanese, right? Carrying weapons and pretending to be US soldiers on US soil to commit a major crime was really the style of Japanese people. The aircraft carrier that had been sunk in Pearl Harbor was still there for people to pay homage to. Hijichu didn't like the sight of them. After waiting at the fork for a while and calculating the time, Hijichu finally brought Yi Xian out of the fork after the other party had already run for a while. Not far ahead, the lights flickered a few times before going out again. They still have to use flashlights at night. Do these people have night vision? Hijichu muttered quietly as he chased forward. This time they were at the back, but the pursuers had run ahead of them. Hijichu held his gun and carefully counted. Then he fired a burst of bullets at the target. He used normal bullets to shoot these people and didn't use bullets with the magnetic storm effect. The pursuers who ran ahead didn't expect that the people they were chasing had actually circled behind them. A night of pursuit made these people somewhat tired. Just as they were about to put down their weapons that weighed more than 10 kilograms and rest for a while, they suddenly felt a sharp pain in their backs. They all fell to the ground and were also killed by Hijichu. Yi Xian also participated in the battle this time. He personally fired and killed at least 2 of the pursuers. Hijichu patted his shoulder as a silent compliment. After this time, the 2 of them cooperated even better and quickly got rid of the remaining pursuers. They circled around the hill a third faster than expected and arrived at the side of Highway 95. The phone's GPS showed that Little A was not far away. Little A also heard the phone's warning from inside the car and saw that the little red dot representing Hijichu was almost at the car door, so he quickly opened the door and got out. The cliff was steep, so Hijichu and Yi Xian finally slid down from the top of the mountain. Little A quickly led a few people to where Hijichu and Yi Xian had slid down to catch them and help them up. "Mr. E, was the mountain road difficult to walk on?" Little A squinted at Hijichu. Hijichu shook his head. The mountain road was difficult to walk on, and there were also pursuers. They finally had a power outage and internet connection, so we were able to escape. As they spoke, the sky suddenly brightened. A red sun burst out from the horizon, and the gorgeous and brilliant sunlight instantly bathed Utah's mountains and rivers. It's another day, Little A sighed emotionally. He urged Hijichu and Yixin to quickly get into the car. They had to rush to the international airport in Salt Lake City, the capital of Utah. Little A's mission was to safely escort Hijichu and Yixin from Little Rock Canyon to Salt Lake City International Airport. After entering the car, Hijichu shook his head at Little A and said, "You didn't do the first step well." Little A knew he was in the wrong, so he groaned and tried to salvage his dignity. "Mr. He, we really didn't know the other party had so much power this time. They were actually able to mobilize the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet to cover for them." "I reminded you," Hijichu said dryly. "You were working for money anyway. If you didn't succeed, of course the money would be reduced proportionally." There was nothing wrong with what he said, so Little A didn't even have the intention to argue. He quickly nodded and said, that's right. It was our mistake, so you should receive effective compensation." Hijichu grunted and said, "Hurry up and start driving." The motorcade immediately set out, and there was a bulletproof car of the same model and color in front to open the way and clear the obstacles for him. "Where's the armed helicopter I asked you for?" Hijichu propped his head on the edge of the window and glanced at the sky that had just brightened. "Little Rock Canyon issued a flight ban, so the permit is invalid," Little A muttered. "It's fine. Let them fly over to cover us," Hijichu ordered expressionlessly. "The other party's plane will catch up soon." Although his magnetic storm bullet had blocked the other party's electromagnetic communication system and paralyzed the radar, the other party should have recovered after a night of maintenance. Realizing that Hijichu and Yixin had already escaped the valley, those people would immediately use fighter jets to chase after them. As soon as Hijichu finished speaking, the sound of fighter jets' engines rang out in the sky. Those people had arrived here faster than he had expected. This is the third update, and today is the third update, seeking recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is Monday, so recommendation votes are very important. Good night, dear friends. Chapter 841. The United States had more than 12,000 fighter jets in total. Just the number alone was already the number one on the entire blue planet, but they were distributed among the three armed forces. Each military branch was equipped with about 4,000 to 5,000 fighter jets. OV Air Force Base had about several hundred fighter jets. Because this base was inland, there weren't many fighter jets deployed, and they weren't the latest models. This time it was an F-22 Raptor fighter jet. Although it wasn't the latest model of the U.S. military fighter jets, it was still the most powerful fighter jet currently in service. It was a fifth-generation, single-seat, twin-engine stealth fighter jet and was known to have absolute air superiority in the theater of operations. Of course, the so-called stealth was relative to radar and not the human eye. Fighter jets that could become invisible to the human eye had yet to be born. This type of fighter jet was relatively large, so the strong winds it created when flying at low altitudes could basically cause cars on the ground to go askew. Fortunately, the bulletproof cars Hijichu had Little A prepare were all large and heavy, so the tragedy of people falling and cars flipping didn't happen in front of the F-22 Raptor fighter jet. Hearing the sound of the fighter jet, Little A's expression turned cold. "Mr. He, what do you want to do?" Hijichu looked at the approaching fighter jet and knew it wasn't the Japanese in disguise, so he raised his finger and said to Little A, "Tell them that I'm in the car. If they get any closer, we'll shoot down their fighter jet." "You want to report your name?" Little A knew Hijichu's position in the U.S. military and political circles. This was something their Whitewater Security Company's board of directors had warned repeatedly. "Didn't you want to keep it a secret?" Hijichu had never thought about keeping his whereabouts a secret. He wanted to keep it a secret to give the other party the wrong impression. If the other party knew he was coming, then their deployment wouldn't be like this. He came here to pick up Yixin because he wanted to see how many trump cards the other party had. Also, whether the other party was what he thought they were. Now that Yixin had already come out and the other party's fighter jet had been dispatched, wasn't it suicidal for him to keep it a secret? "Yes. I want to see just how domineering that Admiral Laris can be." The corners of Hijichu's lips carried a hint of a sneer and mockery. He held his magnetic storm grenade gun with one hand and aimed it at the F-22 Raptor fighter jet that was about to fly over. With one hand on his knee, he lightly tapped it and actually started to beat the beat with the music in the car. Hijichu's calmness and nonchalance made everyone relax. Little A picked up the communicator and tested it. He discovered that communication had indeed been restored, so he ordered the pilot of his armed helicopter, Drive over here and shout to the fighter jet. Tell them that Mr. Hijichu is here and ask what they want. The Black Hawk helicopter of the Whitewater Security Company quickly took off from the mountain and met the F-22 Raptor in the air. The pilot shouted over the air channel, "This is Black Hawk. This was the Black Eagle. We are Mr. Hijichu's security personnel and belong to the Whitewater Security Company. Please let us through. Please let them pass." The pilots in the F-22 Raptor were U.S. Air Force soldiers. They had received orders to pursue and kill the terrorist who had attacked Admiral Laris. Originally, the order they had received was to kill without mercy, but the other party actually had a Black Hawk attack helicopter escorting them. Furthermore, it was the Whitewater Security Company that even U.S. soldiers on active duty knew about, so they could not help but hesitate. The Whitewater Security Company employed many retired soldiers as security personnel, and they were famous among the active soldiers. Moreover, the Whitewater Security Company was a security company with a military background, and the company's major shareholder, Nitsch, was the former vice president. With such a background, could it be a terrorist? The pilot of the F-22 Raptor sent this information back to the base to verify its authenticity and request further instructions at the same time. The OV Air Force Base was also a bit surprised when they received the information. They followed procedure and sent the information to Admiral Laris, who was in command at the local base, while also sending the information to the office of the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington. What? You heard it clearly. It's really Hijichu? When Admiral Laris heard Hijichu's name, his unwavering expression cracked for a moment. His pupils abruptly contracted, and his hands trembled slightly as he grabbed a cup of coffee to hold it in his hands to conceal his shock. That's what the other party said, but the person was in the car, so our pilot did not see it with his own eyes. Laris's subordinate reported to him in detail. But according to the records of the Little Rock Canyon Police Department and the information sent by the court, the Whitewater Security Company did indeed apply for a security clearance a few days ago and requested permission to bring wartime weapons and armed helicopters into Little Rock Canyon to protect an important client of theirs. The court confirmed that Hijichu just happened to end a lawsuit in court yesterday, and his client was acquitted on the spot. He wanted to take him away from Little Rock Canyon. Laris' left cheek twitched uncontrollably twice. He rubbed a round gold coin between his two fingers before finally slamming it on the table with a bang. He said in a methodical manner, "Just say we've offended them. Have them get off the car and accept military control. We're currently pursuing terrorists, so we'd rather be wrong than let a terrorist go." His subordinate and the person in charge of the OV Air Force Base looked at each other and nodded before saluting Admiral Laris. "Yes, Mr. Admiral." Hijichu sat in the car and waited for a while before swiping open his phone to send Gunyenji a message. "Yi Xian has already been acquitted and will be brought back to the Wuxia Empire. Don't worry about him." He had just put away his phone when he heard Little A, who was sitting across from him, jump up. His head hit the roof of the car with a loud thud. Little A rubbed his head and cursed at the phone. He blurted out a string of F-words and brandished his fists. "Do they want to die? Get out of the car and accept military control? Do they think we're idiots? Laris, that old B*T*, is tired of living?" Hijichu understood, and his expression was both surprised and expected. He looked at Little A with a complicated expression. "They're asking us to get out of the car and accept military control? This idea wasn't bad. As long as they got out of the car and accepted military control, Hijichu knew he would definitely be fine, but Yi Xian would definitely die from an accidental death. His goal in coming to the United States was to bring Yi Xian back to the Wuxia Empire. He would be crazy to accept the so-called conditions. However, Laris had used the cheap trick of being ambushed, so it really wasn't easy to resolve. Hijichu closed his eyes and thought for a while before saying, "Tell them that I think that Admiral Laris being ambushed is very likely a trap. The target is actually me and not Admiral Laris. For the sake of my own safety, I can't trust Admiral Laris, so ask him to contact the Joint Chiefs of Staff and have them send someone to pick me up to Salt Lake City." Little A laughed heartily when he heard that and slammed his fist on the car seat. "We'll make this old B*TCH's shameful thoughts very clear. Let's see if he still has the face to ask us to accept military control." Little A had the pilot of the Black Hawk armed helicopter pass this message to the pilot of the opposing fighter jet. At the same time, he also sent a message to the higher-ups of his Whitewater Security Company. Hijichu's commission this time was worth a lot, so he didn't want to screw it up and cause the company to suffer losses. Because if the company suffered losses, it would be his personal loss, and he wouldn't be able to get his commission. When Admiral Laris heard his subordinate relay Hijichu's words, he was so angry that he almost lost his composure. His chest heaved up and down, and he used all his self-control to suppress his desire to curse as well. Hijichu really said that? What evidence does he have? Admiral Laris spat out from between his teeth and brandished his fists. It was clearly an attack on my convoy, so how did it become targeting him? What kind of arrogant person would say something like that? Laris's subordinate and the person in charge of OV Air Force Base were embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Was Mr. Admiral arguing with Mr. He about who was the terrorist's target? Why did it seem like this was a great honor? Mr. Admiral, what do you think we should do? How about we let them go? Aren't the terrorists in the mountains? We can just continue searching the mountains, the person in charge of OV Air Force Base carefully suggested. He didn't understand either. How did the pursuit of terrorists end up in Hijichu's name? This person in charge was also a major general, so he had a good understanding of Hijichu's famous name in the U.S. military. Would the guest of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff be a terrorist? Even if he was it necessary to use such clumsy weapons and methods to deal with Admiral Laris? Admiral Laris understood the meaning behind the words of the person in charge of the Air Force Base, so he suppressed his anger and asked, "Are you questioning my decision?" "I wouldn't dare." The person in charge of the Air Force Base quickly saluted and said loudly, "I will definitely obey the Admiral's orders." Good. Admiral Laris nodded, and his expression softened a little. "Send someone to invite Mr. Hijichu over to speak. Tell him that this is an urgent matter, and this is a critical time. When we capture the terrorists, I will personally go to his house to apologize." Laris's words reached Hijichu, but he didn't let anyone pass the message. Instead, he spoke directly into the microphone to the U.S. military pilot. "I am Hijichu. Laris wants to apologize? Fine, let him commit seppuku on the spot. Not committing seppuku is insufficient to express his sincerity. We have already informed Washington that I still have matters to attend to, so I won't accompany him to play the game of soldiers catching thieves. Goodbye." As Hijichu spoke, he indicated to little A, "Order your subordinates to leave this place immediately." This Admiral Laris had the typical personality traits of a right-wing Japanese person. He was paranoid and arrogant, as well as a bit of a tortoise's attitude of, "Those who submit will prosper, and those who oppose will perish." Unfortunately, Hijichu didn't fall for it. Little A had obtained permission from the company's higher-ups, and with Hijichu backing him up, he immediately used a chicken feather as a token of authority. He especially enjoyed the pleasure of going against Admiral Laris. "Attention all personnel. Attention all personnel. Leave Little Rock Canyon immediately. Destination, Salt Lake City International Airport. Roll call at the airport in 4 hours." This was the first night watch. Today was still the third night watch, asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Monthly votes at 1 p.m. 7,900 plus night watch. It seems like it's already the end of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Third night watch at 7 p.m. P.S. Thank you to Heaven's Beggar, Lavender Mimi, and Momo Moshi for their tips yesterday, 10,000 Chidien coins. Mwah. Chapter 842. Under the watchful eyes of the U.S. F-22 Raptor fighter jets, Hijichu's Whitewater Security Company fleet started up one by one and drove forward. The U.S. fighter jet pilots didn't dare to open fire without permission and continued to report to Admiral Laris' temporary command center. Reporting. Hijichu's fleet has left Little Rock Canyon. Hijichu's fleet has left Little Rock Canyon. Admiral Laris sat cross-legged in the temporary command center of OV Air Force Base with a low coffee table in front of him. On the coffee table was a cup of water and a pot of orchids. It was very zen-like. He crossed his arms and closed his eyes. His nostrils flared continuously, indicating that his anger could no longer be suppressed. Their cars left just like that. Yes, Mr. Admiral. Mr. He said they already asked Washington, so. The person in charge of OV Air Force Base didn't have any intention of continuing the pursuit, but Laris was a Navy admiral. Although they weren't in the same military branch, his military rank was much higher than his. It was frightening to be one rank higher, and in the military there were clear boundaries between ranks. This was especially important. So the person in charge made up his mind to do whatever Laris said, but Laris had to leave a handwritten order. But Washington didn't give me an order. Admiral Laris opened his eyes, and the expression on his face was especially wooden. He looked like an honest, reliable and loyal Hokkaido farmer, but the glint that flashed in the depths of his eyes indicated that this person was not ordinary. Fighter jets force Mr. He's vehicle to stop. If he doesn't comply, open fire. The corners of Admiral Laris's eyes twitched. He didn't believe that Hijichu would really dare to cross swords with the regular U.S. military. Laris knew about Hijichu's transcendent status in the U.S. military. Not only did he know, but he had also previously put in a lot of effort to improve his personal relationship with Hijichu. He even used his identity as an Asian in an attempt to get closer to Hijichu through race. He didn't expect Hijichu to not only refuse to have any personal contact with him, but he also turned a blind eye to all of Laris's goodwill and pretended he didn't exist. Laris had long since categorized Hijichu as an untouchable person in his heart. He had long since disliked him. Not long after Hijichu and Little A's fleet drove away, the pilot of the Black Hawk helicopter responsible for the rear discovered something was wrong and quickly shouted to the front, "The Air Force Base's fighter jets are chasing us again. They insist that we stop. Warning is starting, counting down. If you don't stop, you'll open fire." The veins on Hijichu's forehead bulged as he listened. He took command from Little A and said calmly, "Then you open fire first. What are you waiting for?" "Yes, Mr. He." The pilot received the order and immediately turned on the onboard radar, locked onto the fighter at the Air Force Base and pressed the button. A howitzer on the armed helicopter ejected and shot straight at the opponent's F-22 Raptor. The pilot was startled. Because the distance was too close, there was no time to pilot the fighter jet to escape. He made a prompt decision, pressed the emergency button, ejected himself and jumped down to save himself. An F-22 Raptor fighter jet, known as the Overlord of the Skies, with absolute air supremacy, came spiraling down from the sky, emitting black smoke, and smashed into the mountains near Little Rock Canyon. The fire quickly spread, burning the entire fighter until only the frame was left. When Admiral Laris received the news, he flew into a rage and kicked over the small zen-like coffee table in front of him. The water and orchids on the coffee table rolled onto the floor. "Mr. Admiral, do we continue the pursuit?" The person in charge of the OV Air Force Base already had an ugly expression. Their base had a limited number of fighter jets. How would they write the report if they lost one for no reason? "Chase. Continue the pursuit. I'll go personally." Admiral Laris was now completely embarrassed. He didn't expect Hijichu to not give him any face at all. The resentment in his heart had accumulated to a peak, and he was already in a state where he didn't care anymore. "Admiral Laris, the Joint Chiefs of Staff called and requested you to let Mr. He go." His subordinate came over with an urgent top-secret telegram and whispered in his ear, "I have my own judgment, and I will explain to the Joint Chiefs of Staff." Laris stood up with a dark expression and strode outside. He boarded his personal car and ordered, "Catch up to Hijichu's car in front." Admiral Laris's fleet immediately advanced at full speed and chased in the direction Hijichu and Little A's fleet had left. Hijichu's fleet also used maximum horsepower and drove at maximum speed, but Laris could use even more resources. Finally, at a highway toll station, Hijichu's group was stopped. "Mr. He, do you want to charge over?" Little A asked Hijichu quietly while discreetly studying the structure of the checkpoint to search for a place to break through. Hijichu looked at the time and saw there was still an hour before they would arrive at Salt Lake City International Airport. He shook his head, his arm still propped up with his magnetic storm grenade gun, and said, "Then we'll wait. Admiral Laris has determined that I'm a terrorist, so I have to give him an explanation." 10 minutes later, Admiral Laris's fleet arrived at the checkpoint. Hijichu sat in the car and didn't come out. He merely lowered the window and nodded at Admiral Laris, who was standing nearby. "Admiral Laris, nice to meet you." Admiral Laris saw Hijichu's arrogance and didn't even get out of the car. The anger in his heart was like boiling water in a boiler and was already on the verge of exploding. "Mr. He, if you have a clear conscience, why are you running?" Admiral Laris couldn't even maintain his calm expression. He took 2 steps forward and spread his hands. "Or must I personally invite you before you will get out of the car?" "Admiral Laris, I'm a lawyer. Lawyers pay particular attention to presumption of innocence. If you believe that I'm the terrorist who attacked your fleet, then please produce evidence. Randomly arresting people and killing people without concrete evidence? Do you think you're still living in the great Japanese Empire from over 100 years ago? Your orders are the law?" Hijichu said mockingly. His gaze shifted indifferently, and he didn't even look at Admiral Laris. "This is a period of military control. Mr. He, you're a lawyer. Don't tell me you don't know what military control is? Admiral Laris was embarrassed by Hijichu's mockery. As a Japanese American, he was often questioned about his loyalty to the United States. He believed that he was loyal to the United States, but loyalty to the United States and serving Japan's interests were not contradictory to him. That was because in his heart, the United States and Japan were allies, and America's interests were Japan's interests. Similarly, Japan's interests were also America's interests. Haha, Admiral Laris, just do your job as a Navy admiral and have a bright future. Don't try to argue with a lawyer about the law, or what military control is. Hijichu's expression darkened. I already have authorization from the U.S. Joint Chiefs of Staff, so I'm sure you've received the order as well. You repeatedly disobey orders like this and it really isn't like a soldier. Similarly, it's not up to you to question whether I'm a soldier or not. Admiral Laris waved his hand. Everyone get out of the car. Take them away. Behind him, the 100 or so U.S. soldiers wearing balaclavas to cover their heads and faces surrounded them with guns. Cries of alarm instantly rang out at the checkpoint at the toll station. The ordinary citizens waiting to pass the checkpoint were so frightened that they got out of their cars and looked at each other blankly as they witnessed the scene. They weren't sure who this general was talking about, whether it was all of them or the people in the convoy across from him. The current situation was that the ordinary citizens had all gotten out of the car, but none of Hijichu's group had gotten out. That was because they didn't listen to Laris's commands. They only listened to Hijichu and Little A. Do you want to disobey orders? Admiral Laris strode towards Hijichu's car. Stop. Hijichu's cold and clear voice floated out of the car. I'll count to 3. If you don't stop, I'll shoot. You dare? You're on U.S. soil. You dare kill a Navy admiral in front of so many people? A hint of viciousness flashed through Admiral Laris's eyes. He wouldn't be threatened, and the noble blood of the great Japanese Empire flowed in his veins. He wouldn't bow his head to this person. 1. Hijichu set up the magnetic storm grenade gun and moved his eyes closer to the scope. I'm walking over. Shoot. 2. Hijichu's finger rested on the gun bolt, and a small red dot suddenly appeared where Admiral Laris's heart was. Admiral Laris only felt a dull pain in his chest, as if someone had used a sledgehammer to hit him in the chest. It was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. This is the second update, and the monthly votes have been delivered at 7,900 plus updates. Today is still the third update, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. It seems like it's already the end of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Third update at 7 p.m. P.S. Dear friends, did you eat zongzi on the Dragon Boat Festival? Moi. Chapter 843. Admiral Laris stopped in his tracks and covered his chest with his hand as he bent over in pain. His subordinates quickly ran over to support him. Mr. Admiral, don't tell me you've already been shot. You haven't counted to 3 yet? Admiral Laris only had one thought in his mind. Hijichu was telling the truth. He would really shoot him. The moment he lowered his head, he saw the small red dot locked onto by the other party's scope where his heart was. Hijichu didn't know what weapon he was using, but just locking onto a target was enough to exert great pressure. Admiral Laris felt like his heart was suddenly beating extremely fast, and his blood vessels were about to explode. He didn't dare to move a single step, and just like that he was conveniently carried back by his subordinates. Hijichu put away his gun and raised his voice to say, Admiral Laris knows how to adapt to circumstances. I won't make things difficult for you. Goodbye. He raised his chin at Little A. Drive and let the toll booth let us through. The staff at the highway toll booth were scared silly. They would do whatever Little A's people told them to do, trembling with fear that the other party would raise his hand and shoot if he was unhappy. Soon, Hijichu's motorcade passed through the checkpoint at the highway toll booth and quickly drove to Salt Lake City International Airport. Admiral Laris slumped in the car. His chest no longer hurt, but now that Hijichu had humiliated him, he might as well continue to be in pain. An hour later, when Little A's motorcade sent Hijichu and Yi Xian to Salt Lake City International Airport, Hijichu received news that Admiral Laris had a sudden heart attack and was urgently sent to the Johns Hopkins Hospital near Washington for treatment. He sneered and shook his head as he said to Little A, "This Admiral Laris has a lot of drama. Be careful, he's even narrower than the tip of a needle." Little A waved his hand disapprovingly. "Forget about it. It's not like he knows I'm the one escorting you." Little A didn't show his face from beginning to end, and only his subordinates met with Admiral Laris's people. Hijichu felt that little A was too careless, so he gave him a sidelong glance and said dryly, "I really don't know how you can become a mercenary. If it's like this, you'd have died 100 times already." Mister He doesn't need to worry about that." Little A snapped his fingers. "Mr. He, get on the plane." He hoped that Hijichu would leave as soon as possible. Actually, he was also very anxious. He hadn't expected Hijichu to actually go head-to-head with Admiral Laris this time. Although Hijichu didn't take it seriously, little A couldn't ignore it. He still had to work in the United States and couldn't afford to offend these big shots. Hijichu didn't make things difficult for little A. He turned around and said a few words to Yixian before taking him to the customs area. Yixian's passport and visa had been taken away by the court before. After he was acquitted, they were returned to him. Therefore, Yixian didn't have anything else, but he always had his passport and visa with him. With his connections at the Whitewater Security Company, Hijichu and the others quickly passed through customs and arrived at their private plane. The departure time and route had already been coordinated with the airport's air traffic control. They desperately rushed to the airport, even if they offended Admiral Laris, just to catch up with this coordinated time. If they missed this time, the next time they could take off might be 12 hours later. The longer they stayed in the United States, the more trouble there would be. Little A, thank you for this time. Hijichu made an exception and shook little A's hand. I'll leave this gun for you. He gave the magnetic storm grenade gun to little A. Little A quickly declined and said, I don't dare to use this high-spec version and I can't afford it. Just give me a low-spec version. Hijichu smiled. I already took out the chip inside and destroyed it. This gun now is the low-spec version, so it no longer has the magnetic storm shielding function. It's just a normal grenade gun, but it's slightly stronger than the grenade guns in the US military laboratory. Oh, that good. Little A was overjoyed and excitedly took the gun from Hijichu's hand before putting it in the box. He stood in the airport's air traffic control building the entire time and watched with his own eyes as Hijichu's private plane took off before leaving the Salt Lake City International Airport to report back. Gunyinji hadn't been sleeping well the past 2 days. She kept dreaming of bloody scenes and her heart kept pounding. She only breathed a sigh of relief when she received Hijichu's text. Although there wasn't any big news coming from the United States, Gunyinji still kept an eye on the news from Little Rock Canyon, Utah. From the Twitter and Facebook she followed, she learned about a small riot in Little Rock Canyon 2 days ago. Those people only posted a few photos and said that the convoy of Admiral Laris, who was visiting the Air Force Base in Little Rock Canyon, had been attacked. They then condemned the terrorists. There were very few people who retweeted it, and the mainstream media in the United States such as ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN and Fox didn't report it at all. Gunyinji carefully analyzed the photos and believed that they were real. The mainstream media didn't report it, so it was possible that it had been harmonized by the relevant authorities. Yes, there was also harmonization in the American news. This news made Gunyinji ponder it for a long time. In the end, she still felt that the terrorist attack, this time had nothing to do with Hijichu and Yixian. However, it still felt a bit strange for a Navy admiral to visit the Air Force Base in the inland continent. Gunyinji was curious, so she looked up Admiral Laris's life story. What she saw was incredible. It turned out that this person was a Japanese-American who now commanded the entire U.S. Pacific Fleet. Not long ago he had caused many disputes in the South China Sea and caused a lot of trouble for the Wuxia Empire. During dinner, Gunyinji told Machichi about this person and even commented, "The Americans are really quite sinister. Look at how they used this admiral to stir up trouble in the South China Sea. It's really a bit like using barbarians to control barbarians." Machichi looked at it casually and wasn't very interested. She frowned as she plucked at the food in her bowl. Holding her chopsticks in her mouth, she mumbled, "Who cares? You didn't get any benefits anyway. Why did you start investigating an American admiral out of nowhere?" Gunyinji picked up a piece of sweet and sour pork from the plate and tasted it. "You think I like investigating him? I was paying attention to my own case, so I accidentally found him. He suddenly went to Little Rock Canyon. Don't you think it's strange? A Navy admiral going to inspect the Air Force Base is practically having ulterior motives written all over his forehead." Machichi was amused by her and put down her chopsticks to drink some water. "Yeah, what about Professor He and the others? Are they back?" Gunyinji was about to shake her head when she suddenly heard her phone ring. Glancing at it, she saw that there was a text message. She quickly swiped it open and smiled. "Chichi, you really are the law when you say it. Professor He and the others have arrived at the Imperial Capital International Airport. This is the third watch. Today is still the third watch, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. It seems like it's already the end of the month. Dear friends, hurry up and cast your monthly votes. Dear friends, good night. Wax. Chapter 844. You're back. Ma Chichi beamed with joy and began tapping her chopsticks on her plate. You're back. You're back. Let's see how Gu Yanran will quibble this time. Yi Xian could be said to know all of Gu Yanran's secrets. Gu Nianji pursed her lips and smiled. Although she was very happy, she still pretended to be reserved. Well, it's good to be able to come back safely. We'll leave everything else to fate. You're still pretending in front of me? You're doing this on purpose, right? Ma Chichi laughed as she pinched Gu Nianji's lips. Let me see what ivory comes out of that dog mouth of yours. You're the one with the dog mouth. Gu Nianji was originally joking with Ma Chichi, so she was in a good mood and began to play with her. However, the two of them only fooled around for a while before Gu Nianji stopped. I have to go to Professor He's place and wait for them to come back. She couldn't wait to see Yi Xian all right and get first-hand information. He Jichu had always lived in the professor's building at B University. This time he brought Yi Xian back because he was worried about his safety, so he wanted Yi Xian to stay with him. Ma Chichi quickly grabbed her hand. You're going alone? It's already dark. It's fine. We're on campus anyway. Why are you worried about safety? Gu Nianji giggled and went to her room to wash up and change. Ma Chichi thought about it and secretly sent Yin Shixiang a text. Professor, he brought Yi Xian back and Nianji wants to go see them. At the same time, in the small conference room of the Special Operations Forces headquarters, Huo Xiaoheng, General Ji Yin Shixiang, and Zhao Liangzi were listening to the American Special Operations Forces field agent describe the case regarding Yi Xian. This field agent had watched He Jichu's actions the entire time, including when He Jichu and Yi Xian were pursued by Admiral Laris with the excuse of a terrorist attack. Other than not knowing what happened that night in the mountains between He Jichu and Yi Xian, he personally witnessed He Jichu using the power of the Whitewater Security Company to confront Admiral Laris. He even used a pinhole camera to record the entire thing. He Jichu brought Yi Xian back to the Empire on a private plane, and the field agent returned to his own city, New York, to contact Huo Xiaoheng from there. Huo Xiaoheng listened to him explain the gist and called General Ji over to listen to his detailed report. They used the Nandu satellite system's encrypted channel for the video conference, so they didn't have to worry about being eavesdropped. General Ji listened attentively and watched the video that the person had recorded very carefully. When Admiral Laris, the commander-in-chief of the Japanese Pacific Fleet, appeared, General Ji's face darkened. He was all too familiar with this person. He had caused a lot of trouble for the Wuxia Empire during the South China Sea dispute. Laris was so domineering that he didn't even listen to the orders of the President of the United States. He simply put Japan's interests first. Not to mention that the Pacific Fleet was an American fleet, it was actually a Japanese fleet. This Laris has really gone too far. General Ji pounded the table and glared at Huo Xiaoheng. Xiaoheng, does your department have a record of this person? Yes. Huo Xiaoheng nodded absent-mindedly. His gaze was not on Laris. His attention was completely drawn to the strangely shaped gun in He Jichu's hand. Then do you have any rules? How can we allow this slut to use her connections to intimidate others? Although it was now an era of peace and relations between China and Japan had normalized, most people in the Wuxia Empire had not forgotten that humiliating and bloody period in human history. Someone once said that people who liked war were brainless, and people who forgot history were heartless. In the entire Wuxia Empire, Japan was the most vigilant country. And Japan had never given up on their ambitions for the Wuxia Empire. Even though the war had already been lost in the hearts of the Japanese right wing, they would never admit that they had lost to the Wuxia Empire. They only believed that they had lost to the United States in the atomic bomb. Huo Xiaoheng snapped out of his reverie and his handsome eyes flashed. His expression was calm and collected as he gently tapped his fingers on the conference table and closed the video conference. He then sent Zhao Liangzi and Yin Shixiang out to stand guard. Only he and General Ji were left in the conference room. He whispered, "Don't worry, General Ji. Our net has already been cast. The tip-off that the American Whitewater Security Company received this time was from our people." Although the Whitewater Security Company had former Vice President Nich as a major shareholder, Nich had already stepped down and his influence in the government was gradually declining. Most of the time he could not immediately obtain the most confidential intelligence information. At this time, Huo Xiaoheng's field personnel in North America could be put to use. They tried their best to avoid appearing directly. That way if something went wrong they would have a roundabout excuse. Little A was able to immediately know that the Japanese 4-star Admiral Laris had visited OV Air Force Base in Little Rock Canyon because the Wuxia Imperial Special Operations Forces field personnel had leaked the information. General G nodded with satisfaction. Good. Well done. That's how it should be. Let him argue with his superiors. Achieving our goal without bloodshed is the highest standard. Yes, Chief. Wu Xiaoheng nodded slightly. Our field personnel are very attentive and hardworking. Their work is very effective. The consequences caused by Mole's defection last time have finally been made up for. General G knew that he was talking about Bai Yuxing from the Bai family. He was the former deputy director of the Secret Service and was in charge of work in North America. This person's defection to the United States had been a devastating blow to the Wuxia Empire's frontline in North America. Fortunately, Wu Xiaoheng's response was effective. After 2 years of rest, a new network had been established. And for the sake of confidentiality, the domestic agencies had also strengthened mutual supervision and checks and balances to avoid a repeat of the previous situation. Xiaoheng, I trust you to handle things. Your focus should be on Laris. We can't let this kind of person sit in the position of Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. General G was very afraid of him because the Wuxia Imperial Navy was the weakest among the 3 armed forces. Although it had developed greatly, it was still a far cry from a veteran naval power like the U.S. However, Wu Xiaoheng had a different opinion. He purposely turned off the video call because he wanted to tell General G his thoughts. I think that Laris's fate should be decided by the U.S. military. It's not good for us to interfere. If anything goes wrong, the other party will use it against us and say that we are interfering with the internal affairs of other countries. Given that the U.S. often does things that the enemy opposes, they will definitely support. What the enemy supports, they will definitely oppose. So to deal with Laris, we should do the opposite. You mean? I will have our personnel spread the word that Admiral Laris's actions in the South China Sea. The more we praise him, the more the Americans won't be able to sit still, Wu Xiaoheng said nonchalantly. Wu Xiaoheng said nonchalantly. He was very good at sowing discord by doing the exact opposite. General G thought about it for a while and suddenly burst into laughter. He slapped the table and said, Good. Really good. Good. Praise him as much as you can. Just say that we hope Admiral Laris will always be the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet and claim that his retention will strengthen the cooperation between the 2 countries in the South China Sea. Wu Xiaoheng smiled as he took notes and wrote down the main points. He took the opportunity to flatter General G. General G has great foresight. General G knew that Wu Xiaoheng was sucking up to him, but he couldn't help being in a good mood. Once he thought about how Admiral Laris was going to be embarrassed by their fierce praise, he was so happy that he wanted nothing more than to drink 3 big cups of wine. Yin Shixiang and Zhao Liangzi stood guard outside the conference room. Neither of them spoke. Actually, their attention was also on the strangely shaped gun in He Jichu's hand. Little Zhe, do you think it's a coincidence? Yin Shixiang couldn't help but quietly discuss with Zhao Liangzi. Why does Professor He have that kind of gun? Did you see the footage of that fighter jet falling from the sky like it was made of paper? I saw it. Zhao Liangzi's gaze was especially deep. No wonder Hu Xiao was worried about Nianji. Think about it, such a person obviously has such a powerful background and such excellent methods, but he put down everything at hand and went through so much trouble to find Nianji. Then he ran here to guard her. At this point, people like them who knew more inside information no longer treated He Jichu as a normal lawyer. Yin Shixiang pondered for a while and suddenly shivered. Nianji and Professor He really do have a history. That's for sure. But Professor He has never done anything to harm our country's interests. On the contrary, he has protected our country's interests. Zhao Liangzi looked more closely. Did you see his attitude towards Admiral Laris? That kind of disgust is practically undisguised. He doesn't think anything of him at all. Yin Shixiang couldn't understand it no matter how much he thought about it. He was about to ask again when he felt his phone vibrate. He took it out to see that it was a message from Ma Chichi. Professor He is here. He glanced at it, then his eyes widened. Nianji is going to Professor He's house. Zhao Liangzi rubbed his chin and smiled. Oh, that's good news. Hurry up and tell Hu Xiao. Maybe you'll get something out of it. Am I that kind of person? Yin Shixiang glared at Zhao Liangzi. Would I sell this information? You wouldn't? Of course I would. Yin Shixiang instantly laughed. He looked down at his phone to reply to Ma Chichi. If I don't sell it now, when will I sell it? Diske, It's rare to see Huashao at a loss. I hope this process takes a little longer, just a little longer. Before he could finish, Zhao Liang's face instantly paled. He kept giving Yin Shixiang meaningful looks, but Yin Shixiang was still happily replying to Ma Qiqi and didn't see his reminders. Behind them, the door to the conference room silently opened. Hua Xiaoheng and General Ji stood calmly at the door. No one knew how much they had heard. Hua Xiaoheng didn't even look at them and directly escorted General Ji out. He walked quickly, his figure flashing and almost creating a gust of wind that slapped Yin Shixiang's face hard. This is the first night watch. Today is still the third night watch, begging for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Monthly votes 8,200 plus night watch at 1 p.m. Today is already the last day, so hurry up and cast your monthly votes, dear ones. Third night watch at 7 p.m. P.S. Thank you everyone for the Major General's one-year birthday present. Moi. Chapter 845. Yin Shixiang finally raised his head to look. One look and he almost knelt down. Little. Zhe Huashao didn't hear what I said just now, did he? Yin Shixiang's legs were trembling, and his face was drained of all color. What do you think? Zhao Liangzi rolled his eyes. You should just keep these thoughts to yourself, why say it out loud? Haven't you learned your lesson from feeding the pigs last time? Yin Shixiang felt like he could hear the pigs in the kitchen squealing at those words. He wanted to scratch the wall in frustration. He didn't want to feed the pigs again. After a while, Hua Xiaoheng returned with General Ji. He didn't say anything, nor did he look at the two of them. He just walked past them and returned to his office. If Hua Xiaoheng immediately gave Yin Shixiang the cold shoulder, punished him, or even sent him to feed the pigs, it would be better than ignoring him now. Although Hua Xiaoheng didn't say anything, the pressure was even greater than sending Yin Shixiang to feed the pigs. Zhao Liangzi fell silent and quickly returned to his office to work. Yin Shixiang stood at the door of the conference room in a daze for a while before finally deciding to confess. He walked to Hua Xiaoheng's office door and said loudly, "Report. Lieutenant Colonel Yin Shixiang, Deputy Chief of the Special Operations Forces, requests to see Major General Hua." This was an official military title. Hua Xiaoheng couldn't ignore him in the office. "Come in." A calm voice that was neither loud nor soft floated out from the door. Yin Shixiang scratched his head and mustered up the courage to push the door open and walk in. He closed the door and threw himself at Hua Xiaoheng's desk, almost kneeling before him. "Hua Xiao, I was wrong. Please punish me." Yin Shixiang looked at Hua Xiaoheng nervously. He was just short of tears and snot. Hua Xiaoheng slowly raised his head from the computer and glanced at him. His dark eyes carried an indescribable pressure that made Yin Shixiang's knees turn to jelly. He wanted to shrink under the table. "What did you do wrong?" Hua Xiaoheng looked away and returned to the computer, his hands still tapping away at the keyboard. "I shouldn't have gloated behind your back and said those things. I was actually joking. I really didn't want to grow any longer." Yin Shixiang quickly expressed his loyalty. "I'm also worried that Nianji is messing with you like this. I treat her like my own sister." "So you think of yourself as my brother-in-law? No wonder you look down on me." Hua Xiaoheng didn't even raise his head as he spoke calmly. His tone wasn't inappropriate, but in Yin Shixiang's ears, it was so mocking that he wanted to dig a hole in the ground. "How would I dare? If I can really become Hua Xiao's brother-in-law, I'll wake up laughing even in my dreams. It's a pity that my mother only gave birth to me. Otherwise I would have asked them to adopt one from the orphanage." "I don't know if it's too late." Yin Shixiang rambled on in front of Hua Xiaoheng. He was afraid that Hua Xiaoheng would punish him to the point where he wished he could reincarnate and start all over again. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him again. "If you only have this much courage, don't even mention that you're part of the Special Operations Forces. You're still the deputy commander. I think you'll have to retire sooner or later." "Hua Xiao, don't retreat. I'll definitely turn over a new leaf. I won't spout nonsense again," Yin Shixiang said as he prepared to slap his own mouth again. Hua Xiaoheng raised his hand. "All right, save some face for yourself." By saying this, he was letting bygones be bygones. Yin Shixiang had been with Hua Xiaoheng for so many years, so he was very familiar with Hua Xiaoheng's tone and way of speaking. Hearing this, he secretly sighed in relief and didn't dare to act rashly again. However, Ma Qiqi's text was handed over like a treasure. He didn't dare use it to curry favor anymore. Hua Xiaoheng only glanced at it before his eyes narrowed. "Yijichu brought Yi Shen back with him?" "Yes, I heard from Ma Qiqi that they just arrived at the Imperial Capital International Airport." Yin Shixiang glanced at Hua Xiaoheng and said carefully, Our people are probably still guarding the customs. It will take some time to report it. In short, it wasn't as fast as Hijichu directly informing Ma Chichi and then Ma Chichi directly informing Yin Shixiang. Huo Xiaoheng grunted and typed on the keyboard for a while before asking nonchalantly, "Nianji went to Hijichu's place?" Yin Shixiang didn't dare to tease him anymore and quickly said, "That's what Chichi said. Also, with Nianji's personality she can also do it. She went, then she went. It's not a big deal." Huo Xiaoheng didn't seem to care at all. Hijichu just came back, so it's reasonable for her to go see the teacher. Yin Shixiang was speechless. However, Yi Xian is a more important person and is related to several cases. How about this, you go and see what he needs help with. Huo Xiaoheng finished assigning tasks to Yin Shixiang and saw that he was still standing in front of him. He raised his brow. "You're still not leaving?" Yin Shixiang snapped back to reality and immediately saluted. "Yes, Chief." Yin Shixiang left Huo Xiaoheng's office with his car keys. When he passed by Zhao Liang's office, he chased after him in surprise. "Big Xiong, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Yin Shixiang waved his car keys and didn't look back. "I'm fine. I have a mission." "Oh, then be careful." Zhao Liang's relaxed. It was good that he was fine. Gu Yanran had been in a bad mood for the past few days and hadn't been sleeping well. When she couldn't sleep, she would eat light cheesecake, heavy cheesecake, tiramisu, apple pie, pumpkin pie, blueberry muffin. She didn't reject any of them. In just a few days she had gained 5 pounds. The clothes that had fitted her so well in the past couldn't fit anymore. Because she was so worried, she didn't even bother to look in the mirror. So when the specific ringtone rang, she was so shocked that she almost lunged to grab the phone and swipe it open. She was afraid that the person would disappear without a trace again. "How is it? Did you take care of Yi Xian?" Gu Yanran asked anxiously. The person on the other end sneered. "You still want to take care of Yi Xian? Aren't you being too careless?" Gu Yanran was also very tough. She had to be tough. If she didn't, she would really lose everything. "Help me this time and I won't look for you again. I mean what I say." Gu Yanran forced herself to calm down. "If you don't help me, I can't guarantee that I won't expose you in my sleep one day." The person on the other end seemed very shocked that Gu Yanran still dared to threaten her. After a moment of silence, the voice from the phone suddenly became high-pitched. "Gu Yanran, you piece of trash. Why don't you go die? You still dare to threaten me? Do you know that you've caused my death this time?" Yijichu went to the United States. He personally went to the United States to bring Yi Xian back. Who can fight him? You've caused my death. I'm warning you, if you dare to drag me into this, I'll make your life a living hell. I mean what I say. If you don't believe me, I'll send you a few pictures and let you see what the people I've killed look like. Gu Yanran was so shocked that she took 2 steps back and stumbled to the sofa armrest to sit down. She could barely hold the phone with one hand. "What did you say?" "Lawyer, he went to the United States. He personally went to the United States." "When did that happen? Why didn't I know?" Gu Yanran hugged her head with both hands and was about to go hysterical. Why? Why does everyone have to go against me? They're all trying to force me to my death. You didn't know? You piece of trash. That's why you're completely standing aside and relying on me to help you. Gu Yanran, you're just a piece of trash that can't be helped. Don't even think about the Gu fortune. Return it as soon as possible." Gu Yanran calmed down as soon as she heard about the fortune. She sneered. "Then you want to see Gu Nianji become the richest person in the world? She's just an orphan girl. Does she deserve that?" The person on the other end didn't speak again and seemed to be in deep thought. It was so quiet that it seemed like the phone had never existed and it was all a figment of her imagination. Gu Yanran panicked and slapped the phone. "Hello? Are you still there? Did you hear me? I heard you. Stop tapping on the phone." The person on the other end was especially impatient. His attitude was completely different from when they first met. Gu Yanran also felt very uncomfortable. "Now that things have come to this, I can only help you this much." The person on the other end sighed. "Gu Yanran, I've never mistreated you all these years. You'd better behave yourself in the future. This is the last time I'm warning you. Don't reveal our relationship to anyone. Once someone finds out, Gu Yanran, you won't even be able to live, let alone enjoy wealth and glory. You know what I'm capable of. You know very well whether or not my words are threats. That's all I have to say. Think about it yourself." The call ended and the beeping sound came from the other end. Gu Yanran still held the phone in her hand and sat on the sofa in a daze. She watched the sunlight shine through the floor-to-ceiling windows and land on her feet. The wheel patterns on the Indian hand-woven wool carpet were like swirls. She felt a little dizzy just looking at them. Gu Nianji carried her laptop bag and waited for them downstairs at Hijichu's professor's building. She came early and waited for a full 2 hours. Fortunately, Yin Shixiang also came and waited with her. The two of them chatted and laughed. Later he called Ma Qiqi over, and the three of them played poker in the little pavilion in front of the building. When it was almost dusk, she finally saw Hijichu's flashy Maserati drive over. This is the second update. The monthly votes of 8,200 plus updates have arrived. Today is still the third update, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is already the last day. Dear friends, please cast your monthly votes quickly. P.S. You can only cast 2 votes for a book in 1 day. You can only cast 5 votes for a book in 1 month. So dear friends, don't hold on to your monthly votes until the last day. There are no more double votes. Chapter 846. Professor He is back. Gu Nianji's eyes lit up as she left Ma Qiqi and Yin Shixiang behind to greet him. Hijichu had a chauffeur to drive him this time, so he directly took him downstairs. As soon as he looked up to see Gu Nianji's smiling face, Hijichu's cold lips curved into a happy smile. His cool face no longer appeared so indifferent. He opened the car door and walked out to stand in front of Gu Nianji. The car hasn't stopped yet. Don't run around. Gu Nianji looked up at Hijichu, her delicate face almost glowing under the setting sun. Professor He, you are back. Congratulations to Professor He for your victory. Professor He is worth 2 people. Gu Nianji's flattery flowed freely. Although Hijichu knew she was flattering him with flowery words, his heart still rippled with joy. Okay, I know you are not so excited because of me. Hijichu smiled as he patted her head. Yi Xian is in the car. He turned to Gu Nianji. Gu Nianji looked over and waved at Yi Xian, who was sitting motionlessly in the car. Yi Xian, welcome home. Yi Xian's emotions were extremely complicated. On the way, Hijichu had told him that if it weren't for Gu Nianji, he wouldn't have come to the United States to save him. It was Gu Nianji who begged him to help, so he helped. He also told him not to thank him, but Gu Nianji. Yi Xian knew what he had done to Gu Nianji, especially when she was in danger in Germany, but it was this little girl who had saved him again and again. Thinking of this, Yi Xian's nose cringed as tears threatened to fall. He quickly turned his head so Gu Nianji wouldn't see the tears that almost fell. Gu Nianji couldn't actually see Yi Xian's expression through the dark brown car window, but she still saw it when he turned his head so violently. Retracting her hand, she tugged at Hijichu's shirt and pouted at the car. Professor He, what happened to Yi Xian? Is he injured? Hijichu glanced at her and knocked on the window. Get out. Yi Xian opened the door on the other side and got out. He took a deep breath and adjusted his collar before turning to smile at Gu Nianji. Miss Gu, nice to meet you. Gu Nianji wasn't used to Yi Xian being so polite, but she understood his feelings. No matter who it was, they wouldn't be in a good mood after being imprisoned in the United States. Hello, welcome back. Gu Nianji nodded at him with a smile. Her eyes were like dots of paint, and her fair face looked even more like flawless jade. Her entire person was generous and radiated with vitality like the sun. Yi Xian knew that Gu Nianji had grown up with Hua Xiaoheng, so he couldn't help thinking that the Gu Nianji who grew up with Hua Xiaoheng was much better than when she was young. The Gu Nianji at that time, even the Gu Nianji he chatted with on the internet, had a gloomy personality and often lost her temper. Of course, he wouldn't distance himself from her just because she threw a tantrum. On the contrary, Yi Xian was extremely patient with the people he cared about. For example, he was once like this with Gu Yanran. Yes, I'm back. Thank you for saving me again. Yi Xian walked over and extended his hand to Gu Nianji. Don't worry. I'll tell you everything tomorrow after I rest for a night. Gu Nianji's eyes instantly lit up like the stars in the sky, but she still suppressed the joy in her heart and pretended to be polite. How can I do that? You should rest for 2 days first. Hijichu shook his head with a smile and took Gu Nianji's arm. Let's go upstairs first. What are we doing here? His hand slid down to hold Gu Nianji's hand as he pulled her to the lobby on the first floor of the professor's building. Yi Xian stared at their intertwined hands for a while before walking to catch up. Yin Shixiang and Ma Qiqi watched the entire time and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Seeing the three of them leave, they hurried to catch up. Yin Shixiang said quickly, Professor He? You're back. I welcome you back on behalf of Hua Xiao. Hijichu had already seen Yin Shixiang and Ma Qiqi beside him, but they didn't speak, so he pretended they didn't exist. Now that Yin Shixiang spoke, it was something Hijichu didn't like to hear. He still ignored them and held Gunyenji's hand tightly as they walked into the elevator. Gunyenji was so happy that her heart was about to explode. She didn't realize at all that it was inappropriate for Hijichu to hold her hand like that. She only cared about looking at Hijichu's face and figure. Worried that he had been injured in the United States, she asked, "Professor are you okay? What could happen to me?" Hijichu glanced at her. "Do you want something to happen to me?" Gunyenji quickly shook her head. "Of course not. But I saw the news in Little Rock Canyon. It seems like something big happened there. I'm worried." "Worried about what?" Hijichu said nonchalantly as he glanced at In Shixiang and Ma Chichi. The two of them entered the elevator like they knew each other very well and stood in front of Yi Xian. Yi Xian stood in the middle of the elevator. Behind him were Hijichu and Gunyenji, who were pressed against the inside of the elevator. In front of him were In Shixiang and Ma Chichi, who were pressed against the elevator door. With Yi Xian blocking the center position, Hijichu was even more fearless and didn't let go. Gunyenji whispered, "I'm worried that you'll get hurt?" She raised the hand that was holding Hijichu's to carefully examine it. It seemed like he was indeed fine, so she wanted to break free. Hijichu gripped her hand even more tightly and said dryly, "Don't use too much force. My arm's sprained, the muscles in the back of my shoulders are strained, and the tendons in both legs are strained." Yi Xian was speechless. He blushed a little and could only look up at the sky. He didn't expect He, who was usually very careful with his words, to actually speak so casually. Gunyenji became nervous when she heard that. "Really? I'm guessing it won't be peaceful." She quickly relaxed her grip and stopped struggling. She carefully pinched Hijichu's elbow. "Where did you sprain it? Do you want to hire a bone setter?" The door of this elevator was a mirror. In Shixiang saw Hijichu's actions in the mirror and heard what he said. He couldn't help but snort and say, "I only know how to set bones. Professor do you want me to set it for you later?" Hijichu met his gaze indifferently in the mirror and said coldly, "No need. I'm afraid I'll be crippled if you set it for me." Gunyenji saw In Shixiang and thought about how he had just said, "on behalf of Huoxiao." She actually calmed down and allowed Hijichu to hold her hand as they walked out of the elevator and into Hijichu's suite together. After entering, Hijichu finally let go of her hand and turned to Yi Xian and the uninvited In Shixiang and Ma Chichi. "You guys sit." He then instructed Gunyenji, "Go prepare coffee and snacks for the guests. I'll go change." He then walked into the bedroom as if no one else was there. Gunyenji often came to Hijichu's suite for classes, so she was used to making coffee for everyone. She quickly replied, "Okay." She turned to In Shixiang, Ma Chichi and Yi Xian. "Sit. What kind of coffee do you want?" "Professor has cappuccino, latte, black coffee and also milk tea. I made it myself. What kind do you want?" Ma Chichi immediately said, "I want a cappuccino." "Nyenji, I'll go make it with you." Gunyenji nodded and smiled. "Thank you, Chichi." Her beautiful eyes looked at In Shixiang and Yi Xian. "What about you two?" In Shixiang said, "Black coffee with milk and no sugar." Yi Xian had just gotten off the plane and didn't want coffee. "Do you have tea? Give me a cup of green tea." Gunyenji smiled. "Yes, I'll make it." She walked into Hijichu's kitchen with Ma Chichi and found the coffee box, milk buns and tea leaves to start preparing. Ma Chichi helped Gunyenji grind the coffee beans as she whispered, "Nyenji, do you make coffee here often?" Gunyenji was so familiar with the place that she was like a hostess. Of course, Hijichu's tone when he spoke to Gunyenji earlier was also very intimate. There was a terrifying tacit understanding and a hint of pampering. Ma Chichi looked at Gunyenji worriedly and couldn't help but sigh when she thought of Huoxiaoheng, who didn't bat an eyelid. The two of them lowered their heads to prepare the coffee and milk tea. Not long after, they heard the doorbell from the living room and the sound of the front door opening. It seemed like someone had arrived. Hijichu had only just changed his clothes when he saw Huoxiaoheng had already entered the room and was standing in the living room of his suite. It was the third watch. Today was still the third watch, begging for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today was already the last day, so hurry up and cast your monthly votes, dear ones. P.S. You can only cast 2 votes for a book in 1 day. You can only cast 5 votes for a book in 1 month. So don't hold on to your monthly votes until the last day. There are no more double votes. Chapter 847. Huoxiaoheng stood in the middle of the living room of Hijichu's suite and glanced around the entire room. In Shixiang stood behind him and had just closed the door when he saw Hijichu walk out from the hallway to the bedroom. He had changed into khaki casual pants and a gray pinstriped shirt. The collar was slightly open and revealed a hint of his exquisite collarbone. He looked solemn and bright. He had just washed his face and his hair was a bit wet. His expression was cold as usual, but when he saw Gu Nianji walk out of the kitchen with a cup of coffee, his eyes lit up and his expression brightened. Gu Nianji looked up to see He Jichu and Hua Xiaoheng standing face to face in the middle of the living room. Hua Xiaoheng was wearing a general's uniform, navy straight tube wool trousers and a brown and brown woolen military jacket. The general's regular uniform was made of wool and had a small lapel that looked as if it had been cut with a knife. It just happened to reveal the first button of the shirt inside. The buttons on the white shirt were tightly buttoned all the way to the top, just below his Adam's apple. Just like that, he stood ramrod straight in the middle of the living room. He was tall and slender, towering and imposing. His deeply handsome face was not as cold and indifferent as He Jichu's, but it was not as warm and lively either. He had his usual calm and collected demeanor of a general. "I don't know what brings you here, Major General Hua. Your presence brings light to my humble abode." He Jichu nodded slightly in acknowledgement and turned to Gu Nianji. "Why are you standing there? Bring out the coffee and snacks for the guests." Gu Nianji replied, "Oh." She carried the tray and bent down to put the black coffee and muffins on the coffee table in front of the seat Yin Shixiang had been sitting at. The cappuccino and honey cake were for Ma Chichi. Yi Xian made a cup of green tea with some glutinous rice and green tea dumplings. Gu Nianji made herself a cup of milk tea. Hua Xiaoheng came later and didn't have time to prepare drinks for him. Gu Nianji looked up at him. Hua Xiaoheng put his hands in his trouser pockets and nodded to He Jichu. Big Xiong left and didn't come back. I didn't know what happened and was worried about his safety, so I came to see. Yin Shixiang was so embarrassed he wanted to crawl into a hole. "Hua Xiao, you're so concerned about me, I can't take it anymore." However, he didn't dare to continue acting presumptuously in front of Hua Xiaoheng, so he could only pretend to cooperate. He lowered his head and walked to Hua Xiaoheng to admit his mistake. "Hua Xiao, it's my fault. I was playing cards with Chichi and Yanji and forgot the time. I didn't call you back in time." Hua Xiaoheng grunted, "Just this once." He then turned to look at Gu Nianji and said, "Don't drink milk tea at night. It will affect your sleep." He then asked her, "Have you had dinner?" Gu Nianji waited for He Jichu and Yi Xian the entire afternoon. Because she was very excited, she didn't feel hungry. But now that the excitement had passed, he was a little hungry. She glanced at He Jichu. "Professor He, do you want to go out for dinner?" Before He Jichu could respond, Hua Xiaoheng immediately said, "So you haven't eaten yet? How about this? A chance encounter is better than an invitation. Today I'll be the host and treat Professor He and Yi Xian to a meal. What do you two think?" She then said, "Big Xiong and Chichi, is it convenient for you guys?" Sure. Ma Chichi was enjoying the show from the side. How could she let go of such a great opportunity? She quickly nodded in agreement. Yin Shixiang didn't even have time to object. He gloomily glared at Ma Chichi. He only felt that his wife only knew how to hold him back. His eyes were full of resentment. Ma Chichi pretended not to see him and tugged on Gu Nianji's sleeve. "Nianji, what about you?" Gu Nianji felt a bit of a headache. She had something to ask Yi Xian and didn't want to go out to eat. He Jichu looked at her expression and understood. "I called for takeout. If Major General Hua would do me the honor, we can eat here." Hua Xiaoheng sat down and reached out to pull Gu Nianji to sit beside him. "Since Professor He is treating, I'll have to trouble you." He quickly turned the tables on Yin Shixiang, Ma Chichi, and Yi Xian. "Sit. What are you standing for? Professor He is about to go order." As he spoke, he even gestured to He Jichu to order. The corners of He Jichu's mouth twitched. He was so angry that his body stiffened. He walked into the bedroom and picked up the phone. He randomly dialed a 5-star hotel and ordered takeout to be delivered within half an hour. Because there were quite a lot of people, He Jichu ordered a 17-dish set meal from the hotel. Coming out of the bedroom, he sat directly on the sofa next to Gu Nianji. He took the milk tea she had just made from the coffee table in front of her and took a sip. Gu Nianji was speechless. Hua Xiaoheng sat on the other side of Gu Nianji. He was tall and the sofa on his side sunk deeply. Gu Nianji was trying her best to stabilize her body so she didn't fall over like last time. However, as soon as He Jichu sat down, she immediately regained her balance. Because the sofa on both sides of her sunk, she was able to sit up straight in the middle. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at him coldly and ignored He Jichu's provocative look. He leaned forward slightly and asked Yi Xian, who was sitting across from him, "Mr. Yi, I heard something happened during your trip to the United States this time?" Just call me Yi Xian. Yi Xian felt very uncomfortable when Hua Xiaoheng called him Mr. Yi. This was also the question Gu Nianji had been waiting all afternoon to ask, so she quickly said, Yi Xian, tell us what happened in the United States. Did the attack on Admiral Laris have anything to do with you guys? Yi Xian hated this the most when he talked about it. He was even angrier than when he was treated as a suspect in the Vanderbilt family's murder case. That Laris is too despicable. Did you know? He actually directed and acted on his own. First, he had people throw bombs at his convoy to create panic. Then he used the excuse of arresting terrorists to start searching for us everywhere. He even blew up the car Mr. He and I were in. That's ridiculous. How is that arresting terrorists? He's obviously selling dog meat. Yi Xian was so angry that he slammed the table and almost knocked over his tea. Gu Nianji covered her chest with one hand and gasped. He really did that? He's a U.S. Army general? What's in it for the United States? He's a U.S. Army general, but he's a Japanese U.S. Army general, Hua Xiaoheng said calmly. He reached out and gently patted the back of Gu Nianji's hand to calm her down. This person's actions in the South China Sea were all detrimental to the long-term interests of the United States, but they were beneficial to Japan's national interests. Haha. Gu Nianji laughed and discreetly pulled her hand out of Hua Xiaoheng's grasp. She said mockingly, this is the saying, his heart is in the enemy's camp. Japan should give him the Good Citizen of Japan award. Yes, I just don't know, how could those people mobilize such high-level people to deal with a small pawn like me? Yi Xian shook his head and wiped his face with lingering fear. He picked up his teacup and took a sip to calm his nervous emotions. Setting down his teacup, Yi Xian saw He Zhichu's cool and aloof expression and had a look of admiration. However, it's a good thing Mr. He went. I don't need to say much about Mr. He's grace in court. I originally thought that such a small, insignificant case didn't need Mr. He's help. Later, I realized that it wasn't the case that needed Mr. He, but Mr. He was the only one who could take me out of the United States safely. Gu Nianji became even more interested. She said repeatedly, tell me, how is Professor He so powerful? Did he make the other party's life a living hell in court? That goes without saying. Yi Xian wiped the hair hanging down his forehead and beamed with joy. But I admire Mr. He's skills even more. Nianji, did you know that Mr. He's skills are incredible? I think he's even better than those special forces soldiers and professionals. He jumped up from the ground in the valley, flew diagonally in the air and fired his gun in the air. It was so cool. Gu Nianji's already large eyes widened even more. She turned to look at He Zhichu and looked him up and down as if she had never seen him before. She exclaimed, is that true? Professor He, when did you learn to do that? Unlike Hua Xiaoheng, Gu Nianji had never seen He Zhichu train, nor had she seen him run cross-country obstacle courses or use all kinds of combat skills. So looking at the refreshing and handsome He Zhichu in front of her, Gu Nianji found it hard to connect him with the heroic image of flying diagonally in the air that Yi Xian had just described. He Zhichu looked down at her for a while and suddenly leaned over to whisper in her ear. You want to see me shoot? Yes. Gu Nianji's eyes were about to sparkle with adoration. Hua Xiaoheng frowned slightly and reached out to grab the back of Gu Nianji's neck. He turned her neck to face Yi Xian. Yi Xian hasn't finished speaking yet. You can't rudely look away. He Zhichu's expression darkened as he reached out to push Hua Xiaoheng's hand away. He said coldly, Major General Hua, I hope you won't touch Nianji. You're in public and you'll trouble her very much. Hua Xiaoheng retracted his hand and raised his chin slightly to glance at him. He said dryly, same to you. Ma Qiqi was sitting on the sofa across from Gu Nianji. Her eyes lit up as she watched the scene unfold. She wanted nothing more than to take a photo with her phone. Now it was Gu Nianji's turn to stiffen. She gritted her teeth and glared at Ma Qiqi, who was watching the show, before turning back to Yi Xian. Looking him up and down, she asked, Yi Xian, what happened after that? How did you guys escape? The enemy had mobilized a Japanese-American general as cover, so it wouldn't have been easy to escape, right? Yi Xian looked at He Zhichu and smiled. Mr. He had a way. He gestured. Mr. He had a very powerful gun. One shot could cut off the internet, electricity and communications, so it bought us a valuable night. He Zhichu closed his eyes and rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. He had forgotten to tell the kid to keep his mouth shut. As expected, Gu Nianji became even more interested. However, this time she was on guard. She protected her neck to prevent Hua Xiaoheng from continuing to strangle her as she asked He Zhichu, Professor He, what kind of gun is so powerful? Is it true? This is the first update. Today is still the third update, begging for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Add updates for Bagel 16's promotion to the leader of the alliance at 1 p.m. Today is June 1st. I wish everyone a happy June 1st. The third update at 7 p.m. P.S. You can vote for guaranteed monthly votes now. Chapter 848. Dear friends, you can vote for your guaranteed monthly votes now. This month, the monthly votes will still be 300 plus updates. Dear friends, I will add on as much as you vote. The rewards and updates will also be returned slowly. There will be a second update at 1 p.m. and a third update at 7 p.m. Dear friends, don't miss it when you pass by. Thank you for your kisses. Please vote for the monthly votes. Chapter 849. Hijichu didn't move. He maintained his languid posture as he leaned against the sofa. His left elbow rested on the sofa's armrest, and he rested his chin on his hand. The fingers of his other hand tapped casually on his thigh. His shimmering, sultry eyes slanted upward, and he had a soul-stirring charm about him. His voice, however, was incomparably cool and indifferent. He looked at Gunyenji. That's just a little toy from the U.S. military lab. Yi Xian didn't know much about firearms, but such a powerful gun could only be an advanced test product from the U.S. military laboratory. After all, the most powerful weapons in the world had all come from the U.S. military laboratory, including the internet, which had become an indispensable part of people's lives. It was first created in the U.S. military laboratory, so he didn't doubt it at all. He nodded firmly. This thing is too powerful, so it must be very expensive to make, right? Hijichu nodded coldly. Cost me a lot of money. You know that I have a big family business, so I have to keep something to protect myself when I go out to work. But now that you know about my family treasure, you have to save me some face in the future. He looked at Hua Xiaoheng meaningfully. Especially Major General Hua. You have to be magnanimous and let me go. Hua Xiaoheng smiled slightly and said calmly, our country doesn't allow private people to carry guns. As long as you don't bring your family treasure into our country, there won't be a problem. Don't worry, Major General Hua. My family treasure will definitely not enter your country. Hijichu turned to the side in response to Hua Xiaoheng. Gunyenji felt a bit regretful. Wringing her hands in front of her, she sighed. What a pity. I can't see such a famous gun with my own eyes. What a pity. Hijichu was speechless. Aren't you exaggerating? You call this a famous gun? Hijichu snorted. You really haven't seen the world. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes flashed, and he quickly exchanged a look with Yin Shixiang. Yin Shixiang's sitting posture didn't change, and even the expression on his face didn't change. He maintained the same exaggerated expression as Gunyenji and smiled. It's really a pity. Compared to Professor He, we are all country bumpkins. Yeah, if only I had such a gun. Last time in Germany, I wouldn't have been chased like a stray dog. Gunyenji was still brooding over falling into someone else's trap in Germany. She still hadn't figured out who the real mastermind was. When she thought about the difficulties and obstacles of the trip to Germany, she couldn't help but think about the psychopathic German murderer, Seth, and the H3-7 they had given her. Gunyenji's gaze drifted to Hua Xiaoheng, and she narrowed her eyes to size him up. Hua Xiaoheng's scalp went numb from her stare, but with his personality, this tiny feeling wouldn't affect him in the slightest, so he didn't move. He only looked at Yi Xian and said, It's been hard on you this time, but you were framed in the United States. Have you thought about who did it? Why would they frame you? Also, have you contacted that lawyer? Although Hua Xiaoheng actually knew what Yi Xian had done in the United States, Gunyenji didn't know, and no one else knew that he knew, so she still had to use Yi Xian to say it. As expected, Yi Xian's expression darkened, and his hands involuntarily clenched into fists. He closed his eyes and finally said, Gu Yanran was the one who set this up. Of course she wants me dead. Only God knew how difficult it was for him to say that. For the past few years, he had spent all his feelings and energy on this woman. It was so blind but also so devoted. The feeling of being entrusted to someone inhuman was so real and so painful. Yi Xian's eyes turned red, and he quickly took a deep breath. Looking up at the crystal chandelier in the living room, he was a bit emotional. Gunyenji habitually bit her lower lip in thought, and 2 tiny teeth marks appeared on her plump, curvy lips. Hua Xiaoheng looked at her bad habit coldly. He reached over and lifted her chin. His thumb gently pressed against her chin to free her lower lip from her teeth. He said, Be careful. Don't grit your teeth in front of outsiders. It'll affect your image. Gu Nianji was furious and instinctively pushed Hua Xiaoheng's hand away. Her bright eyes looked like they were about to spit fire. She looked at Hua Xiaoheng and lowered her voice to say word by word, "Hua Xiao, please behave yourself." Yijichu was also angry. He sat up straight and looked at Hua Xiaoheng. He said coldly, "Hua Xiao, I just said not to touch Nianji in public." Hua Xiaoheng waved his hand and said nonchalantly, "Bad habits need to be corrected in time. This is not touching. This is discipline. I'm already an adult. I don't need you to discipline me." Gu Nianji stood up and sat on the armchair on the other side of the coffee table. Hijichu also stood up and was about to speak when he heard the doorbell ring. It turned out the hotel had delivered food. He opened the door and asked the hotel waiter to set the table for him. He tipped the waiter and said to come back in 2 hours to pick up the cutlery. "Okay, dinner is here. If you don't mind my humble abode, please take a seat." Hijichu was in a good mood and politely invited everyone to the dining room to eat. Hua Xiaoheng actually didn't have any appetite, but if he didn't eat now, it would seem like he was throwing a tantrum with Gu Nianji. He was so much older than her, so he couldn't be like her and be in a bad mood just because she was throwing a tantrum. That would be too degrading. So Hua Xiaoheng calmly walked over. Hijichu's dining room had a long Western-style table. The set meal he ordered was also separate. Gu Nianji was already seated. Hijichu sat in the host's seat, and to his left was Gu Nianji. Next to Gu Nianji was Ma Qiqi. Yi Xian sat across from Gu Nianji. Yin Shixiang was originally sitting next to Ma Qiqi, but when he saw Hua Xiaoheng enter, he couldn't help standing up. Hua Xiaoheng didn't mind at all and raised his hand to signal for him to sit down. He himself sat next to Yi Xian. Everyone had a plate in front of them, and in the middle of the table was a 17-course feast. The hot dishes were simmered on a small alcohol stove, and the food was as delicious as it had just come out of the pot. Everyone was eating like it was a buffet. They picked their favorite dishes and put them on their own plates. Although Ma Qiqi enjoyed watching the show, she liked to eat even more and was a true foodie. Now that she saw the five-star hotel's takeout, she was already eager to have a good meal. She first drank some sea cucumber and corn chowder to fill her stomach, then took a charcoal oyster and put it on her plate to eat carefully. Gu Nianji originally didn't have much of an appetite, but when she saw Ma Qiqi eating so happily, she also took an oyster to eat. There was so much seafood, but she didn't seem to be interested in oysters. She casually ate one and didn't eat any more. She only scooped up a bowl of soup to drink. Hua Xiaoheng didn't eat at all. He only sat at the table with a glass of red wine in his hand and spoke slowly to Yi Xian. His voice was very low, so it was impossible to know what they were talking about. Gu Nianji took a bite and looked across at him. He still seemed angry. Hijichu stopped eating after eating a shrimp. He swirled the red wine in his hand and also spoke to Gu Nianji. "How's your thesis going? What about the lawsuit with Gu Yanran?" Gu Nianji had grown up with Hua Xiaoheng, so she originally followed the principle of not talking during meals. However, she saw that even Hua Xiaoheng didn't follow this principle, so she didn't want to follow it either. She quietly said to Hijichu, "The thesis is still a little short. It's only half done and there are some places that I need to look up. As for the lawsuit..." She looked at Yi Xian, who was talking to Hua Xiaoheng enthusiastically. "Yi Xian is the key witness." Hijichu took another sip of red wine. His expression seemed a little impatient, but he didn't say anything. He nodded. "It's good that you have a plan. If you need any help, just let me know." Gu Nianji quickly said, "I've already troubled you this time. If it weren't for you, Yi Xian wouldn't have come back alive." Hijichu wasn't modest. He smiled brightly at her. "It's good that you know." On the other side, Hua Xiaoheng finally turned to look at Gu Nianji and Hijichu. He wanted to say something, but when he saw Gu Nianji's stubborn expression, he swallowed his words. Ma Qiqi was the only one eating happily at the entire dining table. After she finished eating, she was so satisfied she could barely walk. It was Yin Shixiang who dragged her to the living room to walk in circles so she wouldn't disturb the conversation. Hua Xiaoheng put down his wine glass. Seeing that Hijichu had also finished eating, he said to him, "There's something I'd like to ask Professor He. Would it be convenient for us to talk in private?" Hijichu put down his napkin and looked at Hua Xiaoheng coldly. Hua Xiaoheng still looked calm and collected. He didn't show any emotions on his face. "Yes, please follow me." Hijichu finally got up and led Hua Xiaoheng to the study. Gu Nianji and Yi Xian were the only ones left in the dining room, so it was just the right time to talk. She looked at Yi Xian, who had his head down the entire time, and said quietly, "Yi Xian, Are you sure that Gu Yanran was the one who set this up? This is the second update. It's delivered to the leader of Bagel 16's April promotion. Today is still the third update, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. Today is June 1st. I wish everyone a happy June 1st. The third update is at 7 p.m. P.S. You can vote for guaranteed monthly votes now. Chapter 850. Yi Xian looked at her with raised eyebrows. How could it not be her? Pausing, Yi Xian continued expressionlessly, she first went to my company to make a scene and took the opportunity to throw out the lawyer's address. She knew I would definitely go check it out myself. Who else could it be if not her? Gu Nianji shook her head. She set up a trap to lure you to Little Rock Canyon to find that lawyer. But do you think she could set up a trap in the United States and have a 4-star admiral cover for her? If she had that kind of power, why would she have gone around looking for backers to protect the Gu fortune? Yi Xian frowned. You mean there's someone else behind her? There must be someone else. Gu Nianji didn't hesitate to pat the table to remind Yi Xian. She couldn't sit still the moment you told her you gave me the inventory of the Gu fortune. She wouldn't let you live to ruin her plan. But in the Wuxia Empire what she can do is really limited. If she's not careful she'll lose herself, so she had to lure you to the United States. Yi Xian nodded and said woodenly, maybe? Gu Nianji was a bit dissatisfied with Yi Xian's behavior. Yi Xian, did you know that after you went to the United States, Gu Yanran pretended to be abused by you? She was admitted to the hospital and got the injury report from the hospital. In court, she used the injury report to slander your reputation and tried to make the inventory of the Gu fortune invalid. She also said that the reason you abused her was because she refused to give you the Gu fortune. Yi Xian looked up in shock, his expression as if he had been struck by lightning. What did you say? I abused her? Gu Yanran. For the Gu fortune. This was the biggest joke in the world. Yes, it's not normal abuse, it's sexual abuse. Gu Nianji's expression was solemn. She and her lawyer said you were domestic violence, but I replaced domestic violence with criminal assault and used that as an excuse to extradite you back to the Wuxia Empire. However, Professor, he was even more powerful. He helped you settle your case in the United States and obtained proof of your innocence. That way you wouldn't be extradited back to the Wuxia Empire but would enter the country normally. It would be very beneficial for your domestic case. Yi Xian was flabbergasted. There's still a domestic case. Gu Nianji pretended not to hear what Yi Xian said and continued to say, your criminal assault case in the Wuxia Empire should be resolved very easily. If you're willing, I can recommend a few lawyers to you. Yi Xian let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes. Can I directly sue her for framing me? Of course. Gu Nianji raised an eyebrow. Why don't you just let Professor He continue to represent you? I don't think Gu Yanran will even have to kneel in court. Yeah, I'll ask Professor He. Yi Xian wiped his face and looked sadly in the direction of the window. It was late at night, and the streetlights outside the window emitted a dim yellow light. Through the curtains one could vaguely see the shadows. It was too beautiful to be real. Gu Nianji attempted to comfort him. Yi Xian, this is not a big deal. As for your criminal injury case, ask Professor He to submit a few alibis for you, and the other party will have to withdraw the case. It won't even reach the point of going to court. Also, after that, you can sue Gu Yanran for slandering you and tarnishing your reputation. You can also make her suffer. Yi Xian nodded. I'll think about it. Actually, what he wanted more was to tell Gu Yanran clearly and ask her why. Gu Nianji didn't think much of it. Gu Nianji did not think much of it. How could there be so many strange whys in the world? It was just 3 things. It was either for fame, profit, or love. Gu Yanran was definitely doing it for profit, which was money. To this woman, money was probably the most important thing in the world. She really didn't seem like the daughter of an invisible tycoon. Gu Nianji pursed her lips and continued, now, I want you to say something. In a few days the court will be in session again. Are you willing to appear in court as my important witness? Be your witness? A witness in the estate dispute case? Yes. Gu Nianji nodded. This means that you will be standing on the opposite side of Gu Yanran. Are you willing? Gu Nianji felt that she could trust Yi Xian now, but she couldn't let her guard down. She still didn't know Yi Xian very well. Asking him to appear in court as her witness had already taken a lot of determination. Yi Xian thought about it and nodded. Okay, I promise. Gu Nianji sighed deeply. Then I'll see you in court. Tell me everything you know about Gu Yanran, and I'll choose what I can say and what I don't need to say. Everything? Yi Xian laughed. You're so greedy. There are so many things that can't be said in a short time, and it has nothing to do with the estate dispute case. Just pick the important ones. Okay, that's fine. Gu Nianji agreed. How about this? You gave me that list of assets because you didn't want to appear in court to argue with Gu Yanran, right? Yi Xian didn't avoid it and nodded. Yes, I didn't want to argue with her and testify against her in court. That was why he had privately given Gu Nianji the list of assets and didn't mention anything about helping her testify in court. However, Gu Yanran had a guilty conscience and finally forced Yi Xian to the opposite side. Gu Nianji understood the reasoning behind it and felt more at ease with Yi Xian. Okay, then you have to prepare these things in the next few days. As she spoke, Gu Nianji listed the things she needed Yi Xian to prepare in advance. For example, what could be used to verify Yi Xian's list of assets? Bank accounts and deposits were easy since they could be verified directly at the bank. However, other things such as the major holding companies in the Cayman Islands would be much more difficult to verify. Yi Xian thought about it and said, I can make an index and list all the evidence I can find, then see what I'm missing. Then I'll have to trouble you. Gu Nianji stood up. Find me if there are any problems and we can discuss it together. Yi Xian stood up with her and walked out of the dining room. As soon as they arrived in the living room, they saw Ma Chichi and Yin Shixiang sitting on the sofa very close to each other. Gu Nianji couldn't help coughing. The two of them separated like they were electrocuted. Gu Nianji found it a bit funny and turned to Yi Xian. You can stay at Professor He's place for the next few days. I'll take you to see the guest rooms and see where you'd like to stay. Anywhere is fine. Yi Xian didn't care at all. The two of them were about to look at the guest rooms when the doorbell rang again. The four people in the living room looked at each other and didn't know who it was this time. Gu Nianji stood the closest to the door and looked through the peephole to see that there were actually 4 police officers. 3 male police officers and a female police officer stood quietly at the door. Gu Nianji quickly opened the door and asked in confusion, May I ask what business you have with me? We received a report that a Barbadian man, Yi Xian, has been arrested on suspicion of criminal assault. This is the court document. The male police officer showed Gu Nianji the arrest warrant approved by the court. Gu Nianji was very surprised. It's late at night. You guys also work at night? This arrest warrant was just issued? It was the 3rd watch. Today was still the 3rd watch, requesting recommendation votes and monthly votes. P.S. You can vote for guaranteed monthly votes now. Chapter 851. The 4 police officers at the door heard her and smiled. Madam, the police work day and night, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and there are no vacations. Gu Nianji choked. Fine, the law enforcement department must be like that. There were people on duty 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Gu Nianji looked down at the arrest warrant issued by the court and said, This arrest warrant was signed at 4 in the afternoon. It had only been 2 hours since Yi Xian got off the plane. Yes, the plaintiff is a single woman. She was very afraid that the defendant would continue to abuse her when he returned. Knowing that the defendant returned to the imperial capital today, she specially applied to the court for special enforcement. The policewoman explained to Gu Nianji politely, We followed the possible address of the defendant that she provided and searched from 4:30 in the afternoon until now. We finally found him. The police officers stared at Yi Xian's tall figure warily. The policewoman took out handcuffs to cuff Yi Xian. Wait. Gu Nianji stopped them. Where are your IDs? The 4 police officers took out their IDs for Gu Nianji to see. They didn't seem fake. Gu Nianji's memory was very good, so she memorized the 4 police officers' ID numbers, names, addresses, and police stations with one glance. Can he leave with us now? The policewoman asked again very patiently. Of course, Gu Nianji wouldn't let these police officers take Yi Xian away just like that. What kind of joke was this? Professor, he had risked his life to bring Yi Xian back from the United States. Was he going to fail on his own turf? Gu Nianji giggled. Please wait a moment. I have a few things to say. The male police officers weren't as patient as the policewoman. Their expressions were already somewhat unpleasant. If you have anything to say, wait until we go to the police station tomorrow. We must take him away today. Gu Nianji originally wanted to be polite, but seeing that the police were getting impatient, she put on a stern face and said, There are still 2 hours left today. Please wait a moment. She then closed the door. The 4 police officers looked at each other and began banging on the door. Don't even think about escaping. Our people are all downstairs. Gu Nianji heard this and quickly ran to the balcony to look. Indeed, there were police cars with flashing lights downstairs. It was quite a scene. The police banging on the door was so loud that He Jichu and Hua Xiaoheng, who were having a secret conversation in the study, also heard the commotion outside. The two of them walked out of the study. What happened? Hua Xiaoheng asked. Gu Nianji showed Yi Xian's arrest warrant to Hua Xiaoheng. They're here to arrest Yi Xian. Hua Xiaoheng took it and glanced at it. He also noticed the time on the arrest warrant and flicked it with his hand. Every second counts. He Jichu's expression turned cold. I am Yi Xian's representative lawyer. I will go negotiate with the police. Gu Nianji grabbed his arm. She didn't want to owe him any more favors. Professor He, you've already helped me too much. This time you don't have to do anything. Why use a butcher knife to kill a chicken? Gu Nianji was confident that she could get the court to withdraw the lawsuit immediately. She would prove that the criminal injury case was not established. However, the key point was that the police station was racing against time to arrest people, but the court trial was scheduled according to schedule. Gu Yanran must have thought of this as well, so she went all out and took advantage of the time difference to get Yi Xian out before the court started. Once he arrived at the detention center, there would be a lot more room to maneuver. It was possible to give him an accidental death at any time. Gu Nianji remembered Hua Xiaoheng saying that there was a mastermind behind Gu Yanran. Who knew where this mastermind was hiding? They were able to mobilize a 4-star admiral in the United States, so it was obvious that their power was not to be underestimated. She actually wanted to be Yi Xian's representative lawyer, but Yi Xian was an important witness in her case. If she also became his representative lawyer, it would be disadvantageous for Yi Xian to be her witness. What should she do? Gu Nianji's brain worked quickly to find a solution that would satisfy both sides. At that moment, Ma Qiqi stood up. Nianji, if you don't worry, I will be Yi Xian's representative lawyer today. You. Gu Nianji was a bit hesitant. It wasn't that she didn't trust Ma Qiqi, but she didn't want her to be dragged into this mess. Ma Qiqi quickly said, I also got my lawyer's license. Although I haven't gone to court yet, I'm only representing Yi Xian to negotiate with the police today. There shouldn't be a problem. If you want to go to court, you can change lawyers. Gu Yanran's criminal assault case against Yi Xian would never reach the stage of going to court. Gu Nianji thought about it and still shook her head. They want to take Yi Xian to the police station, so the lawyer I want to find should stay with Yi Xian in the police detention center for at least one night. Qiqi, you're a girl, so it's not very convenient for you to go to the police detention center for one night. Also, she was worried that the mastermind wouldn't let go of the lawyer accompanying Yi Xian. Never underestimate the craziness of your enemy, especially someone like Gu Yanran who was at the end of her rope. This was a painful lesson that Gu Nianji learned after dealing with Gu Yanran a few times. Hua Xiaoheng glanced at Yin Shixiang. Big Xiong accompanied Qiqi and Yi Xian to the police station. Yin Shixiang perked up. He had wanted to do that for a long time, but Hua Xiaoheng was here. He couldn't make the decision without his permission. A soldier's duty was to obey orders. Now that Hua Xiaoheng had given the order, he could accompany Ma Qiqi without hesitation. Yes, Chief. Yin Shixiang answered loudly and walked to the door with Ma Qiqi and Yi Xian. Opening the door, he nodded at the 4 impatient police officers. Sorry to keep you waiting. The 4 police officers didn't say anything else and took out handcuffs to cuff Yi Xian, each holding one of his arms. Ma Qiqi walked over and gently blocked the female police officer. I am Yi Xian's lawyer. Please show some respect to my client. As she spoke, she held Yi Xian's left arm. Yin Shixiang also walked over and held Yi Xian's right arm while pushing the other male police officer to the side. It was allowed by law for lawyers to accompany their clients. It didn't matter if they went to court or to the police station. The police officers didn't say anything else and checked Ma Qiqi's lawyer ID before looking at Yin Shixiang. What about him? Yin Shixiang was about to say that he was Ma Qiqi's boyfriend, but Ma Qiqi had already cut him off and said to the police officers, He's my assistant and works for me. To accompany her to the police station to spend the night with Yi Xian, it wasn't enough to just say that he was her boyfriend. In a place like the police station, only by saying that he was a legal assistant would he be able to follow her in. Yin Shixiang also reacted and shut his mouth tightly. His expression was solemn, like a male assistant. Gu Nianji suppressed her laughter and waved at them. See you tomorrow? She then said to the 4 police officers, I will ask the court to withdraw the case tomorrow. I hope you won't make things difficult for them. Aha, is the court run by your family? You think we can withdraw the case just because you say so? One of the male police officers was a bit annoyed by Gu Nianji's words and spoke rudely. Aha, is the police station run by your family? You think we can arrest people just because you say so? Gu Nianji retorted rudely as she stared at the male police officer who spoke. I will remember your name, police number, ID number, and police station address. I advise you to stay 3 feet away from my friends. If anything happens to them tonight, I will be the first to sue you. As she spoke, Gu Nianji repeated the male police officer's name, badge number, ID number, police station address, and everything else on his ID. At the same time, she repeated the other 3 police officers' IDs. She didn't miss a single digit. This kind of photographic memory shocked the 4 police officers. They looked at each other and didn't say much, but their attitude towards Gu Nianji was much better. They also didn't have the slight impatience towards Yi Xian and the other 2 people earlier. Wu Xiaoheng didn't follow them to the door. Instead, he went to the balcony and sent a message to Zhao Liangzi. He asked him to mobilize the Special Operations Force's informants in the police station to keep an eye on the police station that Yi Xian had been arrested. They didn't want to obstruct the police from performing their duties, but they wanted to ensure that those who wanted to use the police station to cause trouble couldn't do so. Gu Nianji was still worried, so she followed Yi Xian and the others downstairs. She watched with her own eyes as Yi Xian, Ma Qiqi, and Yin Shixiang entered the police car in the middle and watched as the 4 police officers got in. She gestured for Ma Qiqi to make a phone call. Ma Qiqi smiled as she took out her phone and waved it at her. The 2 of them had lived in the same house for so long, so they already had a tacit understanding. Soon after, the police car drove away from the B University professor's building with its lights flashing. Gu Nianji stood alone in the empty space in front of the building and looked blankly in the direction the police car had disappeared in. The streetlights were still very bright, but the places where the streetlights couldn't illuminate seemed even darker. Her mind was a mess, and she didn't want to go up and face the confrontation between Hu Xiaoheng and He Zhichu. She crossed her arms and leaned against the pillar in front of the building. She thought about how to submit evidence to the court tomorrow and get them to revoke the case. Gu Yanran's criminal injury case against Yi Xian was originally Gu Nianji's excuse to give Yi Xian an excuse to extradite. She didn't expect Gu Yanran to be so desperate that she even dared to use Gu Nianji's excuse. Seriously, Gu Nianji couldn't help but wonder what kind of secret Gu Yanran was hiding? Why would she risk it all on one throw? She stood downstairs for a while until her legs were sore, then decided to go up to get her bag and return to the dormitory. As soon as she turned around, she saw He Zhichu and Hu Xiaoheng standing not far behind her. One was on the left and the other was on the right. It was like there was a boundary between them, an insurmountable chasm. Seeing Gu Nianji turn around, Hu Xiaoheng walked over first and handed her bag to her. Are you going back to the dormitory? He actually knew her so well. Gu Nianji took her bag from Hu Xiaoheng's hands, and although she was reluctant, she still pursed her lips and nodded. Let's go. I'll send you back. Hu Xiaoheng reached out and naturally wrapped his arm around her shoulders to protect her. He turned around and waved at He Zhichu. Professor He, you can go back. I'll send Nianji back to the dormitory. He Zhichu didn't move or speak. His entire face was as cold and clear as an ice sculpture. He just stood at the building entrance and watched Hu Xiaoheng walk further and further away with Gu Nianji in his arms. This is the first update. Today is still the 3rd update, seeking recommendation votes and monthly votes. Monthly votes of 300 plus updates at 1 p.m. 3rd update at 7 p.m. P.S. Thank you to my 2 leaders, Enigma Yangxi and Bagel16, for each tipping 10,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Mwah. Chapter 852. Gu Nianji frowned the entire way as she kept thinking about Gu Yanran. Hu Xiaoheng hugged her and turned the corner in front of the professor's building. When he was sure He Zhichu couldn't see them, he finally put his arms down. He put his hands in his pockets and slowed down to match Gu Nianji's pace. Gu Nianji didn't feel anything at all. She moved almost mechanically and followed Hu Xiaoheng to the female graduate student dormitory where she lived. We're here. I'll walk you up. Hu Xiaoheng took her hand. It's so late. Your building manager should be asleep by now, right? You shouldn't go up even if she's asleep. Gu Nianji pulled her hand out without batting an eyelid. I'm very sleepy. I'm going back to sleep. You should go back too. There's so much to do today and we still have to go to court tomorrow. Hu Xiaoheng stared at her and didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he smoothed her hair and patted her shoulder. Go up. Gu Nianji left without looking back, leaving Hua Xiaoheng with only her tall and graceful back view. Hua Xiaoheng didn't leave either. He leaned against his car door and took out a cigarette. He lit it and took a puff. The night in November in the imperial capital was already very cold. However, with Hua Xiaoheng's physique, this temperature wasn't cold at all. Also, he had a lot of work to do, so he needed the cold winter air to calm his mind. He crossed his arms and extinguished the cigarette between his fingers. Looking up, he looked in the direction of Gu Nianji's dormitory. The lights in her room were on, and he could sometimes see people walking around in the dormitory. Later, she sat behind the desk in front of the window and began typing on her computer. Hua Xiaoheng could see the shadows on the curtains. They were graceful and beautiful, with a natural charm and tranquility. Gu Nianji, who was focused on her work, was the most beautiful thing in Hua Xiaoheng's heart. Gu Nianji opened her laptop and first wrote the legal documents to be submitted to the court tomorrow to request for the dismissal of the charges. In addition, she needed evidence to prove that Yi Xian wasn't with Gu Yanran that night. This evidence was very simple. It was the real-time surveillance system of Yi Xian's apartment. However, Gu Nianji suspected that Gu Yanran must have destroyed the evidence after so long. If this evidence was really destroyed, what other evidence could she use to replace it? Gu Nianji opened the map app to check the address of Yi Xian's apartment. She suddenly realized that Gu Yanran was able to destroy the property's surveillance records, but she shouldn't be able to destroy the cameras outside the apartment. To be precise, that camera was a surveillance system installed by the government, and it happened to capture the entrance to Yi Xian's apartment. As long as they could obtain this record, they would be able to prove that Yi Xian had been at home the entire time that Gu Yanran mentioned and hadn't gone out at all. If Gu Yanran had been lying when she said she had tortured him that day, then her claim that she had tortured him continuously was even more untenable. Arguments in court were like this. When there was a problem with one chain of evidence, it would cause a chain effect, causing other related evidence to be invalid. Gu Nianji didn't actually need to prove that Gu Yanran's claim of continuous abuse wasn't true. She only needed to prove that Gu Yanran's claim of abuse that night wasn't true, because the injury certificate issued by the hospital was from that night. Gu Nianji thought about it and opened Weibo to browse. Suddenly, she recalled the short video of Gu Yanran that Kai Songyin had uploaded online. There seemed to be an image of Gu Yanran naked in the video. It seemed to have been taken a few days before Gu Yanran claimed that she had been tortured by Yi Xian. Perhaps she could take a screenshot of the video to see if Gu Yanran had those old injuries on her body. If she had really been tortured continuously, there would definitely be old injuries on her body. If there weren't any, then it would be even more proof that Gu Yanran was lying. Gu Nianji thought about it and searched the internet. Of course, the short video on Weibo had already been deleted, but it couldn't resist the love of the majority of netizens for these kinds of short videos. Many people reposted and saved it on Chengdu's cloud drive. Gu Nianji searched casually and found many resources. She downloaded 2 of the short videos with the largest files and imported them into the image processing software. She planned on using high-definition technology to restore the original appearance of the video. Anyone who had seen the video would know that the video had blurred out the surrounding environment. The man who had slept with Gu Yanran had also blurred out. Only Gu Yanran had been highlighted in high definition. Gu Nianji's image processing software had been modified by her. It was her work from university, so it was much more efficient than many image processing software on the market. She only used an hour to completely reverse the blurred appearance of the short video and return it to its original state. When the man revealed his true appearance, Gu Nianji suddenly laughed. She remembered that Hua Xiaoheng had told her that the Special Operations Forces had also done video restoration work. They had restored the original appearance of the video and found the male lead of the video. It was the newly appointed Prime Minister Tan Dongbang. It was also because of this video that the Senate had initiated impeachment proceedings. Now that Gu Nianji looked at the video, she suddenly had a different idea. She could not refute Gu Yanran's accusation of torture, but she could say that the person who tortured Gu Yanran was someone else. However, this video was considered to be banned content. She would need to get permission from the court to submit this video as legal evidence. Where could she get legal evidence? Gu Nianji thought about it for a while but still had no idea. It was already late at night and she was a bit sleepy. She stood up and rubbed her eyes, planning to turn off the computer and go to sleep. Suddenly there was a flicker of light somewhere downstairs. It was like the glow of a firefly, brief but dazzling. She focused her gaze downstairs and vaguely saw Hua Xiaoheng's car parked in front of the building. A tall figure leaned against the car door, and the light came from between the man's fingers. Hua Xiaoheng still hadn't left. Gu Nianji looked at her watch. It was already 1 in the morning. He had been standing downstairs for almost 3 hours? It was late at night in the imperial capital in November, and the dew was heavy. He wasn't wearing much either. Was he not afraid of getting sick from the cold? The corners of Gu Nianji's mouth twitched. She turned off the lights and prepared to sleep. But when she walked to the bed to take off her clothes, her hands couldn't move. Her mind kept replaying the scene of Hua Xiaoheng downstairs, and her heart was a mess. This person was just so worrisome, Gu Nianji grumbled, but still put on her coat and walked out of the dorm to the elevator. She took the elevator down to the first floor and walked out of the building. Gu Nianji stood on the steps and silently watched Hua Xiaoheng for a while. Hua Xiaoheng was a bit surprised to see her come down. He had seen the lights in Gu Nianji's dorm room earlier, so he thought she was already asleep. This is the second update, and the monthly tickets have been delivered with 300 updates. Today is still the third update, asking for recommendation votes and monthly tickets. The third update will be at 7 p.m. P.S. I was held up by something at night, so it was pushed back a bit. This is a bit shorter, so in order not to make everyone wait too long, I put it up immediately. It will be longer at night. Moi. Chapter 853. Why did you come down? It's already so late and you're still up. Hua Xiaoheng's tone was slightly reproachful as he stood up and tossed the cigarette butt into the nearby trash can. He turned around and said, "Go back, I'm leaving." He waved at her with his back facing her. Gu Nianji still stood on the steps in front of the dormitory building without moving. Her hands were in her coat pockets as she quietly watched Hua Xiaoheng. Under the streetlights, Hua Xiaoheng's features no longer had the steely toughness that seeped into his bones during the day. His entire person was softened by the dim yellow streetlights, leaving only a breathtakingly handsome face. His every move had once made her infatuated with him to the bone. This was her former Prince Charming. She had forcefully turned him from Prince Charming to her man, and then in less than a year, they had almost become strangers again. After the breakup, she had finally woken up from that deep infatuation. Now that she looked back at her previous infatuation, she didn't feel ashamed or embarrassed. In fact, she really missed the days when she could focus on being infatuated with him for 100 years. Back then life was much simpler. The happiest thing every day was waking up in the morning to see Hua Xiaoheng, even if she had to be urged to do morning exercises as soon as she saw him. Unfortunately, we all have to grow up. Hua Xiaoheng opened the door and sat in. He fastened his seatbelt and started the car. He was about to drive away when he saw Gu Nianji still standing on the steps looking at him from the corner of his eye. She only wore a thin coat and hadn't even changed her shoes. They were the same kind of furry slippers she wore in her room. Although they looked warm, they weren't actually warm at all outside. Hua Xiaoheng pursed his lips and finally turned off the car. He took the key out. He got out of the car and strode over to Gu Nianji to hold her arm. "Let's go, I'll take you up." He was so strong that Gu Nianji couldn't push him away even after pushing him several times. Just like that, he dragged her all the way into the elevator, almost half supporting and half carrying her. Gu Nianji came back to her senses and was unhappy. "Don't be like this. Did I agree to let you up? You're always talking to yourself. I shouldn't have been soft-hearted towards you." Hua Xiaoheng looked down at her, his dark eyes bottomless. "You're soft-hearted towards me? Why don't I feel anything?" "Fine, I wasn't soft-hearted." Gu Nianji turned her head away stubbornly. "I was so full that I ran downstairs in the middle of the night." Hua Xiaoheng patted her head and didn't say anything else. He walked her all the way back to the dormitory and watched as she took out her keys to open the door. Then he walked in with her and closed the door behind him. The lights in the living room weren't on, but the light from the street lamps shone through Gu Nianji's open door. After many layers of filtering, the light was so dim that it was almost gone. There was only a layer of dim yellow shadow that allowed people to see the furnishings in the room. "I'm leaving. Last time I said that I couldn't see you until your lawsuit was over, but because of Yi Xian's matter today, I had no choice but to come and see you. You'll have to rely on yourself from now on." Hua Xiaoheng patted her head and stood there, with no intention of moving forward. Behind him was the door. Although it was already closed, his hand was on the doorknob so he could open it at any time. So it was because he wouldn't be able to see her for a while after they parted, so he refused to leave downstairs? Gu Nianji couldn't help imagining things, but she also felt that Hua Xiaoheng wasn't the kind of person who cared about relationships. The simple reason he didn't leave was probably because he didn't have anything to do when he went back, so he wanted to think about things. Of course, Gunyanji felt that the possibility was very small. After all, on such a cold day, who would want to think about things outdoors? She couldn't figure out Hua Xiaoheng's thoughts for a moment. Hua Xiaoheng took her hand and shook it. Intertwining their fingers, Gunyanji felt that his hand was very cold, like ice. This was the result of smoking outside on a winter night. Wait. Gunyanji said as she hurried into her room and took out a pair of cashmere leather gloves she had bought in the past. Put this on. Smoking outside won't freeze your hands. Hua Xiaoheng took it and smiled. I thought you were going to persuade me to quit smoking. The corners of Gunyanji's mouth twitched. This is your personal hobby. I won't interfere. Unless you wanted to quit smoking yourself, it would only annoy you no matter how much other people talked about it. Gunyanji watched Hua Xiaoheng put on the gloves, and he looked even more stylish. She was very satisfied with her own taste. She had originally bought this pair of gloves to give to Hua Xiaoheng as a Christmas gift. Now there was no need to give it to him. Go to sleep. Don't stay up late anymore. Hua Xiaoheng didn't know about Gunyanji's thoughts. He raised his gloved hands and opened his arms to her. Aren't you going to give me a goodbye kiss? Gunyanji was speechless. If you won't give it to me, then I will, Hua Xiaoheng said with a smile. His voice seemed to come from his chest, and it had a pleasant ending. He bowed slightly and slowly pressed his lips against Gunyanji's. Because he was worried that Gunyanji would be disgusted, Hua Xiaoheng didn't kiss her as deeply as before. He only kissed her lightly, and his lips gently brushed against hers. He paused for a moment, then reluctantly rolled around twice before immediately separating. He didn't even give her a chance to object. However, Gunyanji was so shocked by the kiss that she almost couldn't breathe. It was the meeting of lips against lips. It was like a breeze blowing over a lake that had just thawed in early spring. There was a slight coolness of ice shards, but it could also create faint ripples. It was also like a newly grown willow branch hanging down from a tree, gently touching the surface of the lake bit by bit. It was firm but not forceful. It was clearly just a thin kiss, but Gunyanji felt dizzy. She didn't know why, but this kiss that wasn't deep shocked her more than the more intense kisses she had before. She couldn't help but tremble from the bottom of her heart, and her legs involuntarily went weak. This kind of kiss made her feel cherished, valued, and treasured. She looked up at Hua Xiaoheng with a slight sense of dizziness. It was the first time she looked at him with such emotion since she returned from Germany. Hua Xiaoheng sensed that Gunyanji's emotions were strange, and his heart fluttered slightly. Her watery eyes flashed in front of him, and her plump, curvy lips were slightly pouting. She was still maintaining a position suitable for kissing. He couldn't help but want to deepen the kiss, but when he saw Gunyanji's blushing cheeks and thought of her lack of sleep, he held back. He only lowered his head and touched his forehead with hers. Hurry up and go to sleep. You can barely keep your eyes open. Gunyanji obediently agreed and looked up at Hua Xiaoheng's lips. She originally wanted more, but when she thought of the beauty of the shallow kiss just now, she held back. It was such a beautiful memory and she couldn't bear to destroy it. Hua Xiaoheng read her mind and slowly reached out to hug her. He pulled her into his embrace and whispered, "You still want more?" It was the third watch. Today was still the third watch, asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Chapter 854. Perhaps it was because Hua Xiaoheng had stood outside for a long time in the cold night, but his voice was a bit hoarse, but it was even more magnetic. It was like someone had taken a soft goose feather and brushed it against her ear. The numbness spread from her ear all the way to her heart. However, Gunyanji snapped out of her daze when Hua Xiaoheng spoke. Her face flushed and she bit her lower lip hard. Stiffening her neck, she didn't make a sound even though she really wanted to. However, her rationality told her that this wasn't right. She had to hold on. She wasn't ready to accept Hua Xiaoheng again. She couldn't be so intimate with him. Hua Xiaoheng chuckled when he saw her like this. He held her waist with one hand and lifted her chin with the other. His thumb slowly and gently caressed her lower lip. Gunyanji couldn't help loosening her teeth, and her full lower lip was freed. Hua Xiaoheng bent down and pressed his lips against hers like before. However, this time he stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked the lower lip that Gunyanji had bitten. He said, "Next time I see you bite your lip, I'll punish you like this." When he spoke against her lips, his hot breath was like aged wine. It was intoxicating. Gunyanji was deeply bewitched. She couldn't help but open her arms and wrap them around Hua Xiaoheng's strong waist. She tiptoed in his arms, snuggling in his arms. Gunyanji's faint fragrance intoxicated him. He wanted nothing more than to immediately carry her and push her onto the bed. However, Gunyanji seemed to feel his arm move, and her body stiffened. Huo Xiaoheng could only suppress his wild thoughts and continue kissing her gently. He could acutely sense that Gunyanji liked being treated so gently. Perhaps he had been a bit rough in the past, but for a normal man, getting straight to the point with the woman he loved was what they wanted to do the most. Moreover, Huo Xiaoheng was 100 times more hot-blooded than a normal man. However, in order to untie the knot in Gunyanji's heart, he suppressed his burgeoning desire and tirelessly kissed her lips over and over again. Like a dragonfly skimming the surface of the water, they touched once, then parted again, then parted again. When Gunyanji felt like it wasn't enough, she would moan softly, and he would linger on her lips a little longer. When she started to kiss him back, he would take a step back, provoking her to chase after him. Gunyanji's arms moved from his waist to his neck, until she was almost hanging off him. She was so engrossed in the kiss that it was as if the previous kisses did not count. The kiss now was the one that truly entered her heart. It could be stored there for a long time, and when there was no one around, she could take it out and savor it carefully. When she finally woke up from the intoxicating kiss, she found that her hoodie was pushed up to her chest. She had returned to the dormitory to change her clothes in preparation for bed. She did not wear a bra inside, only a loose cotton teddy bear sweater. He didn't expect it to make things easier for a certain someone. Gunyanji panted slightly as she lowered her arms. She looked down at her chest and asked in a hoarse voice, "What are you doing?" Huo Xiaoheng took it out nonchalantly and pulled down the sweater that had been pushed up for her. He said calmly, "Your clothes are messed up. I'm helping you tidy them up." Gunyanji glared at him. She did not understand how he could use such a serious tone to talk about such a shameful matter so confidently. "Okay, it's late. Go to sleep. I'll leave after you sleep." Huo Xiaoheng did not allow her to argue. He took her hand and walked into her bedroom. Gunyanji stopped at the door with her back to Huo Xiaoheng. She whispered, "I'll sleep by myself. You can go back. It's very late." "Okay." Huo Xiaoheng looked at her graceful back and was a bit reluctant to let her go. Her long hair was a little messy from the kiss just now. Huo Xiaoheng tidied her hair and hugged her from behind. He whispered in her ear in a very low voice, "Good night, Xiaoguai." Gunyanji nodded and whispered, "You too, okay?" Huo Xiaoheng hugged her loosely and took a deep breath at the nape of her neck. Then he released her and turned to leave. Gunyanji did not look back. She heard the sound of the living room door opening and closing. She knew that Huo Xiaoheng had really left. She finally let out a long sigh of relief and closed the door to her room. Then she threw herself onto the bed and let out a long sigh. She was really exhausted. She was mentally and physically exhausted. She had also experienced a thrilling sensory stimulation. Under the extreme fatigue, she fell asleep almost as soon as her head hit the pillow. When she woke up the next day, Gunyanji was 100 times more energized. It was like she had taken miracle medicine. She only felt like her fighting spirit was high. Nothing in this world could stump her. She quickly got up, got dressed, and ate breakfast. Then she planned to go to the police station at Yi Xian's apartment to ask for the surveillance footage from the day of the incident. However, as soon as she went downstairs, she saw He Zhichu leaning against his flashy Maserati waiting for her. "Professor He?" Gunyanji was very surprised. "Do you need something? Aren't you going to court? Let's go together." He Zhichu was worried about Gunyanji going alone. Since he didn't have any classes these days, he could accompany Gunyanji. Gunyanji still wanted to refuse, but He Zhichu was already a bit impatient. He opened the car door and got in. With one hand on the steering wheel, he said to Gunyanji, "If you don't want to cause trouble, it's best to let me accompany you." "What?" Gunyanji raised a brow. This place is different from the United States. Gunyanji believed that those people's main power was in the United States. However, this was the Huaxia Empire, so she felt very safe. He Zhichu looked away and said dryly, "There are also their people here. It's easy to dodge a spear in the open, but hard to guard against a stab in the dark. Never underestimate the enemy's dirty tricks." Gunyanji suddenly remembered the H3AB7. She immediately opened He Zhichu's car door and got in. She said to He Zhichu sullenly, "Thank you, Professor He." He Zhichu became even more depressed. In his opinion, the relationship between the two of them had already improved yesterday. However, Huo Xiaoheng's visit had returned everything to square one. Was he really no match for him? He Zhichu's expression was cold as he started the car and quickly drove to the police station near Yi Xian's apartment. The two of them arrived at the police station and requested a surveillance video recording to be used as evidence in court. The police officers looked at their lawyers' IDs and called the court in charge of Yi Xian's case. After fully understanding the situation, they took Gu Nianji and He Jichu to the building where the surveillance footage was stored at the police station. There were people in charge of the surveillance cameras there. Gu Nianji quickly told the management the time and location. The surveillance video at the police station was managed electronically, so it was very easy to find. Within a few minutes, they pulled up the video of the time Gu Nianji requested. From the video, Gu Nianji clearly saw Yi Xian walk into the range of the surveillance video and enter the apartment complex where he lived. Then he went to work the next morning and didn't come out at all in between. In other words, Gu Yanran's claim that Yi Xian abused her at her home that night was completely false. It was enough as long as they had the surveillance video. As for whether or not Yi Xian would have snuck out from another place, they could check the surveillance video on the walls of the apartment complex as supporting evidence. In short, in an era where there were surveillance cameras everywhere and everyone had a cell phone, it was not easy to do bad things in secret. Gu Nianji filled out a form at the police station and requested an electronic backup of the surveillance video. She put it together with the document she requested the court to revoke the case and put it in her laptop bag before leaving the police station. He Jichu went to get his car first, and Gu Nianji waited for him on the side of the road. She was wearing a light camel-colored cashmere cocoon-like coat, a cute cashmere wool hat tilted on her head and black boots. Her slender figure and delicate and beautiful face were very eye-catching. The pedestrians on the street, the drivers, and the passengers in the cars all felt much better when they saw a cute girl with big bright eyes standing on the side of the road. The police station was located at the corner of an intersection with a traffic light. It was working hours, so the intersection was densely packed with cars waiting for the light to turn red. To the left of where Gu Nianji stood, an ordinary-looking young man held a cup of Starbucks coffee in one hand and a phone in the other. He was also checking the news on his phone. To her right, a middle-aged woman in her 40s was carrying a plastic bag and wearing an oversized, gaudy cotton coat. She was also waiting for a car on the side of the road. The street in front of her was densely packed with cars. It was almost as if the seams were connected to each other. Ijichu's car was 1 or 2 cars behind and had yet to drive over. From the car, he saw Gu Nianji waving at him with a smile on her face. The corners of his lips curled up as he raised his hand at her. At that moment, a motorcycle quickly weaved through the traffic on the street and sped towards Gu Nianji, who was standing on the side of the road. In the middle of the traffic jam, a speeding motorcycle was too conspicuous. Almost everyone was looking at it. The young man holding the Starbucks coffee put away his phone and quietly walked a few steps towards Gu Nianji to protect her left side. The middle-aged woman in the oversized cotton coat also moved a few steps towards Gu Nianji to protect her right side. Gu Nianji noticed the menacing motorcycle and was also a bit surprised. She took a step back. At that moment, He Jichu noticed a red dot quietly moving to Gu Nianji's chest. His head buzzed, and almost without thinking he pushed open the car door and rushed out. He placed one hand on the hood of the car in front of him and jumped over it like he was jumping a fence. At the same time, the motorcycle had already turned to the side of the street where Gu Nianji was standing. The helmeted motorcyclist jerked the front of the motorcycle with both hands, and the motorcycle almost flew into the air like he was performing acrobatics, smashing towards Gu Nianji. At that moment, the young man standing on her left kicked the motorcycle and flipped it over onto the sidewalk. The motorcyclist who was about to throw himself forward to snatch Gu Nianji's backpack from her rolled to the ground. The young man shook his hand and poured a cup of scalding Starbucks coffee down the motorcyclist's neck. The man howled like a pig being slaughtered. The middle-aged woman standing on Gu Nianji's right quickly protected Gu Nianji behind her. These two people were the Special Operations Forces security personnel that Hua Xiaoheng had arranged for Gu Nianji. As long as Gu Nianji went out, there would be different people protecting her. However, only He Jichu could see that the motorcyclist was actually used to divert everyone's attention. When he realized that the red dot had locked onto them and was almost motionless, he flew forward in a panic and threw Gu Nianji and the middle-aged woman to the ground. Then he hugged Gu Nianji tightly and quickly rolled on the ground towards the entrance of the police station. Almost at the same time, a series of muffled gunshots rang out not far from him. This is the first update. Today is still the third update. Asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Monthly votes at 1 p.m. plus 600 updates. Third update at 7 p.m. P.S. Thank you to Momo Moshi and Love Amy for each tipping 10,000 Chidian coins yesterday. Moi. Chapter 855. Although the gunshots were muffled, the bullets fired were like armor-piercing bullets, or perhaps even more powerful than armor-piercing bullets. When they landed on the ground, they created deep pits on the cement floor in front of the police station. Rocks flew and smashed into the cars waiting for the red light on the side of the road, causing a flurry of honking sounds. The tranquil morning was suddenly thrown into chaos. The drivers and passengers in the cars watched this scene that could only be seen in Hollywood movies. They were so scared they couldn't move and didn't even have the strength to open the doors to escape. Hijichu hugged Gunyenji tightly and quickly rolled to the side of the police station. A few police officers rushed out. "Get down. They have guns." Hijichu could only shout in desperation. He actually knew that the gun was much more powerful than a gun. Although it couldn't compare to his magnetic storm grenade gun in terms of function, it was even more lethal. Simply put, Hijichu's magnetic storm grenade gun was the main control, and the gunman's gun was the main damage output. Fortunately, the police officers were well trained and listened to Hijichu's words. Although they couldn't tell if he was telling the truth or not, there was nothing wrong with lying down when the enemy had a gun. Therefore, they almost stumbled and quickly fell to the ground. There were a few more muffled gunshots, and the cement ground in front of the police station was almost plowed. Although Hijichu had already rolled to the large metal gate of the police station with Gunyenji in his arms, he didn't hide against the wall. On the contrary, he still lay on the ground and pressed Gunyenji's head against his chest. Gunyenji took advantage of his loosened grip to quickly look up and saw that there were snipers shooting at them from the small building across the street. Gunyenji was speechless when she saw the cracked cement ground in front of the gate. She thought to herself, "Did you shoot or set off cannons? You're inhuman." Because she had been baptized in the German Alps, Gunyenji wasn't afraid of this sudden situation at all. Instead, she was secretly excited. She wanted the situation to be as chaotic as possible, so she could also pick up a gun and compete with them face to face to see who had better marksmanship. Unfortunately, before Gunyenji could finish imagining herself outsmarting the gunman, she saw 7 or 8 well-trained people surround the small building across the street. Judging from their skills, Gunyenji guessed that they were from the Special Operations Forces. Where was the young man and the middle-aged woman who were protecting her outside? Gunyenji couldn't help poking her head out to take a look. The 2 men, one on the left and one on the right, were crouching on both sides of the iron gate of the police station. However, they were both armed and seemed ready to pounce over to protect her with their bodies. She turned around to look at Hijichu, who also had the same protective posture. Tears welled up in Gunyenji's eyes. She obediently stayed still and didn't want to cause Hijichu trouble. The men from the Special Operations Forces split into 2 groups and went to outflank the building where the gunman was. The gunman's firepower was fierce, but they were not to be trifled with. He was almost plotted against in front of his own home. He couldn't take this lying down. The people from the Special Operations Forces were all highly skilled and focused on teamwork. Everyone made a few hand signals and decided on a plan of action. They split into 3 teams and slowly approached the place where the person was. On the roof of the small building, a tall man used the roof wall as cover. He held a semi-automatic rifle in front of his chest and stared at the scope as he continued to shoot in Gunyenji's direction. By the time he realized he was surrounded, the members of the Special Operations Forces were less than 2 meters away from him. "Put down your gun and put your hands up. Cover your head and squat by the wall. Do as I say or my gun won't recognize you." The team leader of the Special Operations Forces operation calmly pointed his gun at the back of the man's head. There was only a distance of 2 meters. No matter how strong the man was, he wouldn't be able to escape alive. When it came to enemies with guns, the members of the Special Operations Forces would immediately shoot and kill them as soon as they saw the situation wasn't right. They would never let the enemy escape just to keep him alive. Xiaoheng had once said that enemies were only reassuring when they were dead. However, the gunman didn't react when he realized he was surrounded. He remained motionless and maintained his original position. His hand was still on the bolt of his gun, and he looked like he was about to pull the trigger and fire another shot. The members of the Special Operations Forces stared at him nervously. Every one of them had their guns loaded. If the man made any strange movements, they would immediately shoot him dead. The gunman seemed to be still for a moment. Then he tapped his fingers and suddenly turned the gun around. The members of the Special Operations Forces who surrounded him thought he was crazy enough to put up a last-ditch struggle and immediately opened fire. However, the gunman didn't turn the gun around to aim at them. Instead, he aimed at his own heart and pulled the trigger. There was a muffled bang as if a small bomb had exploded in front of them. The man's body was immediately torn apart and shattered into pieces. The entire rooftop looked like a scene from a horror movie. People who didn't know better would have thought there was a ketchup box here. There were red and black human remains everywhere. Even though the members of the Special Operations Forces had been trained to deal with all kinds of extreme situations, they hadn't seen a scene like this often, even during training. However, they were still elite members. They could still use their last shred of rationality to maintain their composure. They called the special forensic doctor, explosives experts, and firearms experts to come to the scene. They also activated special procedures to guard the scene. They could tell that the gun and bullets this man was holding were not ordinary guns and bullets. To be precise, they had never seen any country use such powerful bullets. They also didn't know any gun that could fire such bullets without the barrel breaking. When Huo Xiaoheng received the news and rushed over, the place was already surrounded. No one could approach. Even the residents of the building had been persuaded to leave. The government paid for them to stay in a hotel. They could only move back after the site survey was completed. Because Yin Shixiang and Ma Qiqi were still accompanying Yi Xian in the police station, Zhao Liangzi and some of his guards followed Huo Xiaoheng. What's the situation here? Huo Xiaoheng arrived at the scene but didn't enter. He only stood outside the police line and looked around with his hands behind his back. Inside the scene, experts wearing white protective clothing from head to toe were holding all kinds of equipment and combing the scene inch by inch. Zhao Liangzi went to find the person in charge to understand the situation. When he came back, he quietly said to Huo Xiaoheng, "Huo Xiao, it's like this. You already know what happened before. Nianji's security personnel discovered that someone was trying to assassinate her. After everyone surrounded her, the person chose to commit suicide. No, self-destruct." Zhao Liangzi gestured. At the time there were 7 or 8 of us at the scene. They saw with their own eyes that he turned the gun and shot himself in the heart. Then his entire body exploded like a balloon. This is what you saw at the scene. Huo Xiaoheng raised his hand to cover his nose and coughed. What weapon did that person use? I saw that the entrance of the police station across the street looked like it had been plowed by a bazooka. Zhao Liangzi smiled bitterly and pointed at a firearms expert wearing white protective clothing at the scene. That expert said that this person used a high-function armor-piercing bullet. Its power can only be withstood by the barrel. You're saying that the shooter carried a small explosive with him? Tell me, with the imperial capital's security, how did he pass through all the obstacles and bring the explosive here? Huo Xiaoheng pointed at the scene. This is the 4th ring road of the imperial capital, where all the major universities are located. It's also one of the most important locations for the imperial capital's security. Zhao Liangzi shook his head. That expert doesn't understand either. He's currently collecting all the gun fragments he can find for clues. Huo Xiaoheng didn't say anything. He stood on the rooftop outside the police line with his hands behind his back and looked at the police station across the street. It was there that Gu Nianji was once again being hunted down. These people seemed to be so arrogant that they didn't know what to do. With the security measures he had for Gu Nianji, there were still people who dared to set up a trap to kill her. What about Nianji? Is she okay? Huo Xiaoheng asked without looking back. Zhao Liangzi said, Nianji is fine. Professor, he was with her at the time. According to our people, Professor, he is very agile. At the time, no one noticed that there was a shooter aiming at Nianji. They only saw the motorcyclist. There was a motorcyclist. Huo Xiaoheng turned around and frowned. What happened? Zhao Liangzi recounted the situation again and pointed at the police station across the street. There, Nianji was standing on the street waiting for Professor He to drive over. It was morning rush hour and the street was very congested. A motorcyclist suddenly rushed over and tried to steal Nianji's bag. He hit her with the bike while he was at it. 2 of our people were relatively close to her at the time, so they protected her with one on the left and one on the right. Professor He was the only one who noticed that Nianji was also targeted by the shooter, so he rushed over from behind to save her. This is the 2nd update. Monthly votes of 600+ updates have arrived. Today is still the 3rd update. Asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. 3rd update at 7 p.m. Chapter 856. Huo Xiaoheng's fingers trembled behind his back. He looked in the direction of the police station and asked after a while, "Where is Nianji now?" Zhao Liangzi gestured to the police station across the street. "She's still there. The police won't let them go right away after such a big case." Huo Xiaoheng frowned. What does it have to do with them? It's always like this, they have to find a reason. Even if they can't solve the case, they have to find a reason. they can only dig it out from them. I think the police are treating this case as revenge, so they're probably interrogating Yanji and Professor He to find more clues to solve the case. Zhao Liangzi picked up his phone and dialed the police chief's number. He asked Hua Xiaoheng, "Mr. Hua, do you want to speak to the chief?" Hua Xiaoheng didn't answer and strode downstairs. He went downstairs and crossed the sidewalk that had already been blocked to go directly to the police station. Zhao Liangzi quickly said to the police chief who was waiting on the other side of the phone, "Chief Xiao, our chief is going directly to your police station. He'll be there soon. I'll go over too." He hung up and chased after Hua Xiaoheng. When Hua Xiaoheng arrived at the police station, Chief Xiao was already there to greet him respectfully. "Chief, this way please." Although Hua Xiaoheng was almost 30 years old, he was still much younger than Chief Xiao, who was almost 50 years old. Therefore, when the police officers in the station saw the white-haired chief being so respectful to a young man with an extraordinary aura and calling him chief, they were all shocked. Hua Xiaoheng nodded to Chief Xiao. "I heard you detained 2 people today. I'm here to take them back." He didn't say anything, just wanted the people. Chief Xiao was a bit troubled and led Hua Xiaoheng to his office. "Chief, it's not that I don't want to let them go, but the case today is too serious. They're the only clues." "Shut up." Hua Xiaoheng interrupted Chief Xiao without hesitation. "Although I'm not part of the police force, I've never heard of the police force torturing the victims during investigations. I'll give you 5 minutes to let them go immediately, otherwise you can't afford to offend them." As soon as he finished speaking, Gu Nianji's voice came from one of the rooms. "Listen up, I don't know who wants to harm me and I don't know where their bullets and guns came from. These should be the duties of the police. You should investigate and protect the personal and property safety of us citizens. You should not put the cart before the horse. I know you don't have a clue, but just because you don't have a clue doesn't mean you can hold the victim." I was also confused. I didn't check the almanac when I went out this morning and I met 2 lunatics. Do I need to know what happened? You've already detained me for 22 minutes. In another 8 minutes, I'll be able to sue the police for abusing their authority and illegally detaining me. Her voice was full of energy, and it was obvious that she was not frightened by what had just happened. Hua Xiaoheng's eyes flashed with relief as he walked in. Who are you? Why did you come in so casually?" The police officer in charge of recording and interrogating was very dissatisfied. "Get out. Close the door." Hua Xiaoheng stood at the door without moving. Gu Nianji and He Zhichu sat side by side on the chairs in the interrogation room. He Zhichu looked indifferent, and his expression was cold and reserved as usual. No one knew what he was thinking. Gu Nianji was gesturing to the police officers. "Don't waste your time here. Hurry up and investigate what you need to. What's the use of asking me here if you don't investigate the scene? Yes, I have an enemy and I'm in a hurry to go to court with them. If I tell you, will you arrest my enemy?" What was she saying? Hua Xiaoheng couldn't help coughing at the door. Gu Nianji looked up and saw that it was Hua Xiaoheng. Her eyes lit up. Chief Xiao from the police station followed in and said to Gu Nianji, "Tell us, who is your enemy? Although we may not be able to arrest him immediately, at least we will have a clue." Gu Nianji crossed her arms and raised her chin slightly. "Okay, I'll tell you. My enemy is Gu Yanran. She is my legal sister." Chief Xiao was speechless. "Miss Gu, are you sure? Your sister hired a killer to kill you?" "What?" The police officer in charge of recording felt it was unbelievable. "You don't look like you come from a rich family, do you? How could sisters turn against each other to this extent?" Gu Nianji laughed when she heard that and said, "I didn't say she did it, Mr. Officer. You need evidence to speak. I understand that you want to solve the case, but you're going to be sued any time you want to make accusations." The police officer pursed his lips and smiled sheepishly. "You don't have to worry about it. I was just expressing a reasonable doubt. Usually, when siblings turned against each other, it was 99% because of the family inheritance, which was money. People die for money and birds die for food." It was true. Of course, Gu Nianji wouldn't tell the police how rich the Gu family was. She only shook her head in disdain. "Although she and I are enemies and I'm sure she wants me dead, she wouldn't be able to do something like this." The police officer gloomily drew a cross on Gu Yanran's name. Hua Xiaoheng, on the other hand, felt that Gu Yanran was still a suspect, but he wouldn't explain it to the police officer. He only said, "Chief Xiao, we will take over this case. You don't have to worry. It won't affect your rate of solving cases." "Really?" Chief Xiao was overjoyed when he heard that. His smile bloomed like a chrysanthemum. "Then we can rest assured. They can leave now." He immediately pointed at He Zhichu and Gu Nianji. Hijichu stood up lazily and brushed the non-existent dust off his body. He looked at the police officers in the room coldly. This is the first time, so I won't press charges. If it happens a second time, I can guarantee that you'll be popular in the country and abroad. You'll become a global phenomenon. Chief Zhao's face turned red again, from a chrysanthemum to a dahlia. Gu Nianji wanted to laugh, but Hua Xiaoheng glanced at her. Her expression immediately turned serious. She nodded at the police officers in the room and followed Hijichu out of the interrogation room. Hua Xiaoheng said to Chief Zhao, "We'll be in charge of these two from now on. You don't have to worry about them." He was reassuring Chief Zhao not to be frightened by Hijichu's words. Chief Zhao breathed a sigh of relief. After all, as a police officer, who would want to become a global phenomenon, like Hijichu said, it couldn't be anything good. Gu Nianji followed Hijichu out of the police station and waited at the door for a while. When Hua Xiaoheng came out, Gu Nianji went up to him and asked, "Hua Xiao, how's the situation over there?" "That person committed suicide." Hua Xiaoheng didn't hide it from her. "You have to be careful when you go in and out." "I know." Gu Nianji nodded. "I'll go to the court with Professor He to submit evidence and documents to request the court to withdraw Gu Yanran's charges. That way we can get Yi Xian, Qiqi and Brother Xiong back." "Go." Hua Xiaoheng waved his hand. "Close the case as soon as possible, then focus on your estate lawsuit." They really couldn't delay it any longer. It was the third watch. Today was still the third watch. They were asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. They just wanted to say that if they had monthly votes, then vote. Don't keep them. You won't have children even if you keep them. Chapter 857. Hijichu got into the car with Gu Nianji and drove directly to the courthouse where Gu Yanran was suing Yi Xian. After all the twists and turns in the morning, it was almost noon. There weren't as many cars on the road as there had been in the morning, and Hijichu's face was dark the entire time. He floored the gas pedal and sped like lightning, quickly arriving at the courthouse. The two of them brought the evidence they had just obtained from the police surveillance and the documents requesting the court to withdraw the charges to the mediation room of the courthouse. They had called before coming, so the courthouse had already arranged everything. The mediator, the bailiff, Yi Xian, Ma Qiqi, Yin Shixiang, as well as Gu Yanran and her lawyer Jin Wani were all there. Seeing Gu Nianji appear at the door of the mediation room energetically, Gu Yanran's eyes instantly narrowed. However, she quickly returned to normal and nodded at Gu Nianji calmly. "Little sister, you're here." Gu Nianji had goosebumps from hearing Gu Yanran call her little sister. She couldn't help but shake her wrist. "Miss Gu, you're too kind." Then she immediately turned to the mediator. "I'm here to help Yi Xian's lawyer, Ma Qiqi, submit the evidence and legal documents requesting to withdraw the charges. May I ask who is the person handling this?" The mediator extended his hand to her. "Give it to me. I'm the mediator of the court." Gu Nianji quickly handed the documents over. The mediator took it and quickly looked through it. Seeing that the forms were completed, the chain of evidence was clear and credible, and the logic was detailed, he couldn't help nodding in approval. Closing the documents, the mediator looked at Gu Yanran and Jin Wani, who were sitting to the side. "Plaintiffs, the defendant has now submitted evidence to refute the plaintiff's allegations. They say there is insufficient evidence and request the court to withdraw the case. What do you think?" He then reminded them, "It's fine if you don't agree to withdraw the charges, but this way, you must have new evidence to ensure a trial. Otherwise, the court will still rule that you lose based on the current evidence." Gu Yanran started crying as soon as she heard that. Tears streamed down her cheeks. "How could this be? Are all the suffering I suffered just because there wasn't any evidence left at the time, so it doesn't count?" Gu Nianji raised a brow and said calmly, "None of us have the heavenly eye and know exactly what happened. I also don't want to use any malicious intent to guess Miss Gu's motives. I only know that evidence is important in court. Miss Gu, tears cannot be used as evidence in court. It's useless no matter how much you cry." Her tone was calm, but her words made Gu Yanran feel very awkward. Gu Yanran didn't know whether to cry or not, so she could only lower her head to wipe her tears and pretend to be bullied. He was sitting at the other end of the conference room and hadn't said a word since last night. Engu and Gu didn't say a word. And said, "Gu Nianji." Gu Nianji ignored Gu Yanran and turned to Jin Wani. "Lawyer Jin, what do you think?" Yanyi Gu, and said. Ma Qiqi also said, "Litigation is our profession. I'm sure Lawyer Jin knows the procedure very well." Jin and An and Jin and said. Jin would, Asma. And said. Jin said and. Jean Wani didn't expect Ma Chichi, who looked like a carefree girl, to be so provocative. In. Ming and King. Ming, and A and Wan and. Jean Wani was annoyed. Of course, she knew the case wouldn't be easy, but she agreed to let Gu Yanran go to court because Gu Nianji made sense. Jean Wani couldn't help borrowing her argument. She also thought that Yi Xian had committed a big enough crime in the United States, so he wouldn't be able to escape the law no matter if he was absent or was caught. Who knew He Jichu would step in and clear Yi Xian's case? That put them in a passive position. Jean Wani looked at Gu Yanran and said to the mediator, "I want to discuss this with my client." The mediator nodded. "Sure. The small conference room is for everyone to use. It's very safe and the court guarantees there are no eavesdropping or recording devices. You can use it without worry." Jean Wani forced a smile and followed Gu Yanran into the small conference room. Closing the door, Jean Wani frowned. "Yanran, are you still going to sue Yi Xian? Now that Yi Xian's case in the United States has been acquitted, and Gu Nianji has also obtained his whereabouts that day, it will be very difficult to continue prosecuting him." He then asked, "Tell me honestly what exactly happened that day. Did Yi Xian really hit you?" Gu Yanran could tell from Jean Wani's tone that she thought she was lying. She couldn't help feeling guilty, but she couldn't admit it. She immediately said, "Yi Xian and I can't be cleared up with just a few words. He's heartless, but I can't be heartless. Forget it, I won't sue him, but I want to apply to the court for a restraining order to prohibit him from appearing within 10 meters of me. Also, he just finished a lawsuit with me, so there's a conflict between us. He can't testify in court in the estate dispute case." Jean Wani was speechless. "You've already sued him. Isn't it too late to say, he's heartless but I can't be heartless?" Jean Wani was still very professional. She nodded. "Okay, then that's settled. I'll apply to the court." After leaving the small conference room, the two of them returned to the mediation room. Jean Wani said to the mediator, "My client agrees with the court to withdraw the case. However, my client wants to apply to the court for a restraining order to prohibit Yi Xian from appearing within 10 meters of my client. Also, he's not allowed to testify in court in the estate dispute case." The mediator looked at Gu Yanran and asked, "Does the plaintiff agree?" Gu Yanran pursed her lips and nodded. She said with an aggrieved expression, "I've been friends with Yi Xian for many years. He's heartless, but I can't be heartless. I won't sue him, but I don't want to see him again. Also, I'm afraid of him." With that, she glanced at Yi Xian again and bit her lower lip. Gu Nianji looked at Gu Yanran's act coldly and suddenly realized that biting her lower lip was indeed very unsightly. No wonder Hua Xiaohan corrected her so many times. Ma Chichi stood up and smiled. "Miss Gu really knows how to confuse right and wrong. You've already sued, but now that you know you can't win, you're saying he's heartless. You can't be heartless. TSK, what if you win? Seriously? Also, this is a separate matter. Whether Yi Xian can testify in court in the estate dispute case between you and Gu Nianji depends on the court filing the case. This case has nothing to do with that case, so we can't make such a ruling." Jean Wani also agreed with what she said, but she could only criticize it silently. However, as the defendant's lawyer, Ma Chichi could say it out loud. The mediator also said, "The restraining order can be considered, but whether or not he can testify in court in another case is not within the jurisdiction of this court. You'll need to apply to the court filing the case." Gu Yanran thought about it and realized it was indeed true. She couldn't help blushing. She glanced at Yi Xian again, but this time she realized he was looking at Gu Nianji. His gaze was so focused and gentle that Gu Yanran suddenly felt extremely indignant. Although she was the one who left Yi Xian first, she still felt bad seeing him change targets so quickly. It was all because of her. Gu Yanran's gaze darkened as it moved to Gu Nianji's face. As soon as this woman appeared, her life was turned upside down. Did she really think she didn't know who she was? Unfortunately, she wouldn't dare say it even if she was beaten to death. She said it, she would die. Gu Yanran's mouth was tighter than a clam's shell. She didn't say a word until she walked out of the courthouse with Jean Wani. Gu Nianji successfully led Yi Xian out of the courthouse. Yi Jichu walked in front alone and had no intention of talking to anyone. Ma Chichi and Yin Shixiang followed behind and didn't know what they were whispering to each other. Gu Nianji realized that after this incident, the two of them were no longer avoiding each other in front of others. She smiled at the silent Yi Xian and asked quietly, "What did those two do yesterday? Do you know?" Yi Xian's mind was churning with countless things and he was highly nervous. He was just thinking about what he would say if Gu Nianji asked him about Gu Yanran and Gu Xiangwen. However, he didn't expect Gu Nianji to say something so gossipy. His nervousness immediately dissipated, and he glanced at her with a smile. He turned his body slightly and whispered in her ear, "How would I know? They were whispering to each other last night?" Gu Nianji snickered. Ma Qiqi, who was walking behind them, finally snapped back to reality. She blushed and walked quickly to Gu Nianji's side. Pulling her arm to the side, she whispered, "I heard something happened when you came in this morning?" Gu Nianji asked curiously, "How did you know?" "I heard it from him." Ma Qiqi glanced behind her. "Him? Who is he?" Gu Nianji teased her on purpose. Ma Qiqi smiled and nudged her. "Okay, I admit it. I was talking to Brother Xiong. He's my boyfriend now." Gu Nianji couldn't help but give Ma Qiqi a thumbs up. She said enthusiastically, "That's great. Brother Xiong is a good person. He might even be a virgin. You found a treasure." "Oh." Ma Qiqi froze. "Are you serious? Brother Xiong hasn't done it yet?" She knew Yin Shixiang wasn't young anymore. Was there something wrong with him? Gu Nianji laughed so hard she almost couldn't breathe. "I'm just saying. You'll have to ask him yourself." They chatted and laughed. Soon they got into He Jichu's car and went back to school. At that moment, Hua Xiaoheng was taking the information the firearms and explosives experts from the Special Operations Forces had collected from the scene of the gunman's self-explosion that morning to the Institute of High-Energy Physics to visit his mother, Song Jining. "Xiaoheng, what brings you here today?" Song Jining came out in a white lab coat. She was in high spirits. Her eyes were clear and her skin was fair and delicate. There were no wrinkles at all. She looked like a girl in her 20s. Even people who knew her found it hard to believe that she already had a son as old as Hua Xiaoheng. If it wasn't for the fact that everyone knew she was really sick all these years, some people would have believed she had plastic surgery. Hua Xiaoheng was carrying a black briefcase with a password. It contained the special evidence collected from the scene that day. He showed the briefcase to Song Jining. "I have some business to ask you. Are you free? Let's find a convenient place to show you something." This was the first update. Today was the third update. Asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. Monthly votes were 900 plus updates at 1 p.m. Third update at 7 p.m. P.S. Dear friends, please vote if you have monthly votes. I also have recommendation votes. I'm going to pass 1 million recommendation votes soon. I'll add one more update to everyone's recommendation votes. Thank you for your support. My recommendation votes and monthly votes were all given to me by everyone. Thank you very much. Oh, __intersection. Oh. Chapter 858. Work? Can I help you? Song Jining was very happy when she heard this. She felt very guilty towards her only son. She hadn't raised him much since he was born. It was Hua Xiaoheng's grandmother, Xie Zian, who had raised him herself. Song Jining loved her research work the most in her life. Her son was second, and her former husband, Hua Guanchen, was third. That should be within your job scope. Hua Xiaoheng patted his suitcase and said very softly, "Maybe it has something to do with my grandfather." Song Jining suddenly became serious. She immediately brought Hua Xiaoheng to her key laboratory and closed the door. She pressed a button and a bulletproof fence slowly closed from the side of the room, separating the office into two parts. "You can tell me now." Hua Xiaoheng knew. Although the Institute of High-Energy Physics was a place for scientific research, it usually didn't have many secrets. However, Song Jining's Institute of High-Energy Physics had cooperated with the military on many projects. The security level here was no longer that of a normal scientific research institution. Song Jining had even released their strongest defense against outside interference. It was obvious that this matter was very important to them. Hua Xiaoheng sat across from Song Jining's desk and pressed the password on the suitcase to open it. He turned the suitcase to face Song Jining. "Look, do you recognize what this is?" Song Jining looked at the open suitcase. There were a few transparent plastic bags inside. The transparent plastic bags contained some dark fragments. She didn't know where they came from. Song Jining looked at Hua Xiaoheng suspiciously. "Where did these come from? Why do you want me to recognize them?" "Don't worry about where these came from. I just want you to confirm if these are things that you recognize." Hua Xiaoheng took out a transparent plastic bag from the suitcase and gently pushed it. The plastic bag slid on the smooth surface of the desk to Song Jining. Song Jining reached out a finger to press it down to prevent it from sliding under the desk. Just as her finger pressed down, Song Jining seemed to realize something. She quickly used her hand to pinch the fragments in the plastic bag. She was very curious about the feeling. I have to test it. Song Jining's interest was piqued. She took out a new pair of plastic gloves from the drawer of her desk and put them on. She carried the plastic bag to her desk. Wu Xiaoheng walked over and watched from the side with his hands behind his back. Song Jining took out a fragment from a transparent plastic bag with a pair of tweezers and placed it in a lead box. Then, she placed it in a device that could detect the composition of materials. Wu Xiaoheng noticed the label on the instrument, inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectrometer. Song Jining started the machine and explained to him, this machine can use plasma to stimulate the sample to vaporize and decompose it into atoms. The atoms will be excited in a light source and emit light. The system will use the spectroscopy system to conduct quantitative analysis of the spectrum and obtain the material structure diagram of this fragment. Wu Xiaoheng listened quietly. After a while he said, material analysis seems to be in the field of chemistry. Do you have any suitable equipment here? Song Jining was the director of the Institute of High Energy Physics, not the director of the Institute of Chemistry. Song Jining smiled. This fragment of yours doesn't look ordinary. It's a high-energy material, not an ordinary material. That's why it needs to be analyzed physically, not chemically. Wu Xiaoheng understood. I didn't come to the wrong place. Song Jining stopped talking and focused her attention on the testing machine. Wu Xiaoheng waited beside her for 2 hours. The instrument was still analyzing, but Wu Xiaoheng had already sat on a chair and started checking his email on his phone. Song Jining also returned to her desk to read the thesis. The office was quiet. The afternoon sun shone in through the large glass windows, and the laboratory was as warm as spring. Song Jining finished reading the thesis and realized that 2 hours had passed, but the instrument was still analyzing. She couldn't help but ask Wu Xiaoheng again, where did you get this thing? Is it important? Wu Xiaoheng put down his phone and looked up at Song Jining. His expression was very calm, and it was impossible to tell what he was thinking. Song Jining looked at him for a while and nodded. It's very important. It can give me an idea. Maybe the method of analysis was wrong. Wu Xiaoheng thought about it for a while. Of course he couldn't tell her the truth, but he could still explain the function of this thing. Wu Xiaoheng said carefully, it's like this. This thing is a fragment from a weapon. We don't know how that weapon came about, but we know that it has a very strong carrying capacity. For example, a high-power and high-function armor-piercing bullet that can only be carried by a cannon can be shot out from a small gun barrel. This is the fragment left behind after the gun barrel exploded. If this thing wasn't so special, there wouldn't be a fragment left after the gunman self-destructed. The other party didn't seem to care that they found the fragment, so the more important thing was probably destroyed. Wu Xiaoheng's gaze was a little deep. Song Jining frowned and tapped her head with her fingers. Hearing you say that, I seem to have a familiar feeling. What is it? Wu Xiaoheng sat up straight. Think about it carefully. Did you do some experiments in the past? Or was this a product of the laboratory to begin with? With this reminder, Song Jining's hand froze. She maintained her posture and thought for a minute before she gasped and stood up. I'll go check. Who didn't use a computer to check things these days? But Song Jining didn't. She dove into a small study in the laboratory and rummaged around for a long time before finding a very old booklet that looked quite old. Wu Xiaoheng walked over and asked, what are you looking for? Your grandfather's experimental notes. Song Jining flipped through it quickly. All of your grandfather's experimental records and notes were destroyed in the explosion. Only this notebook survived because I took it by mistake and brought it back to the Hu family. Wu Xiaoheng was speechless. Found it? Song Jining had flipped through this notebook countless times since she woke up. This was the only memento her father, Song Haichuan, had left her. She could almost recite many of the things in the notebook. What is it? Wu Xiaoheng looked over with Song Jining to look at the page she had flipped open. This is a record of a new type of high-energy material that my father accidentally discovered during an experiment. Song Jining stuffed the booklet into Wu Xiaoheng's hands. Look at it yourself. I'm guessing it's most likely this. As she spoke, she excitedly returned to the lab bench and turned off the magnetic inductively coupled plasma atomic emission spectrometer. If it was a new type of high-energy material, then these instruments that measured the composition of normal materials wouldn't work at all. Sure enough, when she turned on the instrument, the fragment was still lying in the lead box. It hadn't been vaporized at all. No wonder the instrument hadn't produced any results after 2 hours. It only took half an hour for the analysis of normal materials to produce a complete molecular and elemental diagram. Song Jining curved her lips and lovingly pointed at the fragment. What a naughty little thing. But don't be too happy just yet. I'll definitely find the composition of your material. She took the fragment out of the apparatus and walked to another lab table. She pulled out a strangely shaped small apparatus from the shelf on the table and put the fragment into it with a pair of tweezers. Then she started the machine for another round of testing. This time it only took her a minute to get the results. As expected, this is the new material that your grandfather discovered. He named it X1. Song Jining murmured. But how did this thing come into use? It's clearly still in the experimental stage. Not only was its performance unstable, but it was also extremely expensive to produce. Basically, 17 years ago, the cost of producing it was 1,000 times the price of gold of the same weight. Song Jining found it hard to imagine that someone had obtained a stable X1 and could even make it into a practical weapon. Just the thought of the cost made Song Jining dizzy. Based on the price 17 years ago, this gun would probably cost more than 10 years of research funding for the Institute of High Energy Physics. Not to mention the technological advancement that this kind of stable material would bring to society. Hua Xiaoheng calmly listened to Song Jining finish describing the material's performance. He reached out to take the fragment and put it back into the plastic bag. He said calmly, maybe it's not that expensive. Technology will develop and the price will go down. The question now is, other than my grandfather, who else knows about this new material? Song Jining looked at the fragment in Hua Xiaoheng's hands reluctantly and shook her head. Not many people know about this. My father hid it from me. I only found out after reading my father's notes. But my father worked with the military for a secret experiment. I don't know if the military knows. Hearing this, they all thought of one person. It was Hua Xiaoheng's uncle, his father's older brother, Hua Guanyuan. But Hua Guanyuan also died in the big explosion 17 years ago. But before he died, did he report the discovery of this new high-energy material to the military? Hua Xiaoheng thought for a moment and asked, what was the direction of the secret experiment that grandfather worked with the military? This experiment wasn't Hua Xiaoheng's responsibility. Theoretically he couldn't ask. But now that he had this fragment as a bridge, he could reluctantly ask. Song Jining looked at him and smiled. She avoided the question and said, the main experiment wasn't this new material. This new material was just a byproduct of the experiment. The people from the Institute of High Energy Physics who participated in the military's secret experiment were also disciplined. They couldn't reveal confidential information to Hua Xiaoheng just because he was her son. Hua Xiaoheng understood what Song Jining meant and didn't continue asking. He got up and said goodbye. Thank you for your help. I have to go back. Song Jining walked him all the way downstairs and watched him get into the car before waving and leaving. Hua Xiaoheng came out of the Institute of High Energy Physics and reported directly to General Ji. Then, General Ji immediately ordered a meeting to be held at the headquarters of the Special Operations Forces. Because the major and vicious case that happened near the 4th Ring Road of the imperial capital in the morning involved some old events from 17 years ago, several standing members of the Imperial Capital Military Supreme Council and General Ji came to the Special Operations Forces to listen to his report. This was the second update. Monthly votes of 900+ updates had been delivered. Today was still the third update. Asking for recommendation votes and monthly votes. The third update was at 7 p.m. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.